Of? Okay, great. Okay, thank you. And then I also have Miss Lou Brown, who was wanting to say that she stands in support of the Guardian program. She's from the city of Mount Dora. So those four people were just wanting to say that they are standing in support of the program. Anybody else, it is our public input time, and if you also want to stand in support or in opposition of without speaking, you are more than welcome to do that. It does limit the repetitive nature of some of the comments in regards to certain topics that we speak about. So with that being said, we will start with Mr. Peter Carroza? Carroza. Yep. You have 3 minutes, and if you are you going to speak?
Yes, I just like to
Come up, right up here to the microphone over here. Yes, sir.
It's just there's a need to protect our children. We have to figure out a way to do it. I'm retired military. I know that there are a lot of retired folks who are willing to support this program, and I encourage you to follow up with this. I mean, we have to stop the bleeding. There has to be an economical way to do it, and to do it effectively and efficiently. So I just encourage you to follow through with the program.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. McCard?
I fully agree with what Mr. Carroza said. I believe that issue is not being fleshed out well enough. I think we're kind of giving up on the idea of retired vets, police, firemen, military, as a group of people who would help in schools. I know that some right now sitting here would say they give 4 hours a week right now, and we'd be there religiously unless, of course, we have problems, and we have some probably an economical system of filling in for those who can't be there on a particular day. This should not be a vote about who likes President Trump. I basically think that's what this comes down to, that people are afraid of voting for or against Mr. Trump, and that should not be what we're concerned about. I know when I first started being an administrator back about 79, something like that, in the Dane County school system, they started talking about having radios on administrators, you know, the handheld radios everybody has now. And I was against it. Of course, that kind of shows how wrong I can be about something. But I was against it because I didn't want the police, the military atmosphere in the school around kids, and I felt that would not be a good atmosphere for them. But I was wrong. Doesn't mean I'm wrong about this issue. I kind of worry about this little example here. But do you know if I'm carrying a weapon right now? What would you guess? Based upon my personality, you probably think I have about 4 or 5 weapons. No, I'm only kidding. But no, I'm not. And I don't know what the program means about teachers carrying weapons on schools, but I think the program is the gun that's locked away somewhere. But it's not going to, I don't believe, I'm not a soothsayer, that it's going to hurt children's feelings. They'll get used to it. And the first time some teacher who's been vetted and trained and so forth shows it off, they're out of there. I mean, they don't have it anymore, that kind of thing. You know, we're not Dade County, we're not Palm Beach County, we're not Brevard County, we're a lake, we're a different breed of values-laden people. Those counties, I understand, and several other of the major urban counties have all made public statements about how such a bad idea, and you're crazy to think it is a good idea and so forth. But that's why we don't live there, and it's in some regards. So, like the focus groups are all done. The polls are all taken. We elected you folks because we think you can represent sensible ideas best, not go with the wind. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vance Yoakum?
Good morning. I have 2 or 3 things to talk about. One is that I always go back to, since I write a fiscal watchdog blog, as fiscal and budget issues, and I wanted to comment that I think that since there's new law that has given much broader authority to your district auditor, Mr. Mock, who's sitting in the back there, that you should have a workshop and talk about that, because right now you have just one of your members there that does not have a strong background in finance and budgeting, and you need to make sure that they have a strong governance approach. Many corporate boards, when they have a board and they have an internal auditor that reports to them, they have a governance seminars, and they talk about their responsibility to make sure that there is a proper governance of the organization. And part of that is the full open charter authority of the internal auditor. And as a consequence, I don't think I can ever remember seeing anything like that discussed in school board or even county board meetings. And I'd like you to be aware of that, and as always, make the mantra that you should have a second auditor. Add that to the budget. Then next is that I want to commend Mr. Mathias, Ms. Cornegay, and the staff who were at the recent Contractors Association meeting and talked about some of the reforms in your procurement system. And I really think that is very responsible, and I think you ought to share that at some point in time in one of these meetings, because I thought it was very illustrative of the movement in improving the operations of the school board. And then finally is that I'm going to talk about this school safety issue, and I'm in support of the Guardian program as an individual, but what I would like to say is that you as the representative, the elected representatives, need to filter out all the national political strains that are coming into this program. People wearing red, the head of the Democrat Party is here, and you have to decide, is this really for the children, or is this just for a big, large political objective, and Saul Alinsky's objectives, which is create a crisis and then make a lot of noise about it to rally the troops for the upcoming elections. And I'm a cynic, so I believe that because it seems like it happens every year, every election cycle at this point in time. And so I would caution you to filter out all the emotion and look at your issue. You've got feedback from the students and from the locals and the parents, and you make a decision what's right for Lake County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yocum. Mr. Steve Tibbetts.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, School Board Member, Superintendent Cornegay. I stand here before you with a heavy heart for you, for even having to deal with this matter. And as I've said to you, there's nothing that you can do to guarantee our student safety. We've seen schools with armed guards in them and students still being killed. We saw our legislature in a knee-jerk reaction pass Session Law 2018-3 that says, uh-oh, we got to arm people and put them in schools. Today you've got 4 options before you. I would simply say you need to choose the least expensive one and don't waste your money on armed guards. Your money needs to be spent in securing our schools. Fences, locks, metal detectors, to keep weapons out. If you do that, that's a big step. You're facing all sorts of political pressure. I couldn't help but notice yesterday regarding this law that even one of our local legislators didn't support the school safety law. For what reason? Because he wants 18-year-olds to have the right to buy assault rifles. I would love to see this school board, as you so often do, come up with a proclamation that says no private citizen should have the right to possess an assault weapon. They were created for military, for assaults. There is no reason that they're in the hands of private citizens, unless the reason is they want to do what you're trying to protect. But God bless you in this effort. No matter what you do, people will find fault. I certainly don't want to see teachers in our school carrying arms. But I don't want to also have to face the reality that times have changed. I spent 15 years as a chief judicial officer on a college campus, and our police did not carry arms. And we had no violent incidents. Unfortunately, that was many years ago. And how you deal with the changing times, the changing mental health issues, the changing attitudes at home. Good luck. God bless you.
Candace Carcillo.
Good morning. I'm here today as the chapter lead of the Lake County Moms Demand Action, a longtime resident of Lake County and a parent of a school-aged child. Our Lake County Sheriff stated that his officers receive over 800 hours of training with their firearms, and the Guardian program, we are introducing weapons around our children with people who have 132 hours of training. Even assuming teachers and educators with the readiness and training of soldiers or law enforcement, the presence of additional guns risks turning a school shooting into an outright shootout, with students and faculty in the crossfire. Hitting a mobile target isn't easy, and in the heat of a crisis, armed teachers are likely to hit innocent students as they are the shooter. As it stands, Black, Latino, and Native American students are most likely to face harsh punishment in school discipline. In 2007, 70% of all in-school arrests were of Black and Latino students. This increase came despite few racial differences on the offenses. Students of color aren't more likely to misbehave, but teachers and school officials are more likely to impose harsh punishments on offenses by students of color. For example, one 2011 study that found that 32% of Black students were suspended for first-time offenses of cell phone use at school, compared with 15% of white students. A 2016 study in the Denver Public Schools found that many teachers were afraid of their Black students. The report also found that white students are punished differently from their Black counterparts for the most of the same offenses. In one example, a white student deemed bored in class threw chairs around a classroom and was promoted to a higher math class, while a Black student was suspended for simply balling his fists. This is not to say that the teachers would take to using their weapons to discipline Black or brown students, but there is a precedent for physical escalation and confrontations between young people of color and armed authorities. What happens in confrontations between teachers and students when guns are added to that mix? How would students of color fare in armed and fortified schools, where at least some of the teachers are on the lookout for potential shooters? One Brookings Institute report last year found that school resource officers, who are essentially law enforcement personnel on campus, are more likely to be deployed on campuses with large numbers of Black students. In 2014, Department of Education publication found that implicit bias on part of teachers often means young Black males in schools are seen as irresponsible, dangerous, and dishonest. Considering that out of every 5 teachers in our U.S. public schools are white, this is ample reason to worry about the bias that would play out with guns. The data is clear. Whether it's zero-tolerance policies or in-school police officers or armed school staff, the harshest discipline falls on Black and brown students. This needs to be factored in when discussing the Guardian program for our county. And I'd be happy to provide you with any email links with those articles and publications. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fontana.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Fontana. I'm a resident of Lake County, a former kindergarten teacher at Grassy Lake Elementary School, the mother of school-aged children, and the aunt of 14-year-old Kara Loughran, who was killed in the shooting at her high school at Parkland 3 months ago. As the family member of a victim of gun violence, I'm here to tell you that I understand the desperation that we all feel to solve the epidemic of school shootings in our country. I understand the fear and the desire to find a quick, simple, one-size-fits-all solution to the recurring nightmare that more and more school communities are facing. I know that some people feel that arming our teachers would make kids more safe in schools. I wish it were true. Unfortunately, the statistics indicate that the presence of a gun, even in the hands of someone with good intentions, increases risks posed to children. Many of America's teachers, school safety experts, and law enforcement personnel oppose arming teachers. The National Association of School Resource Officers have voiced their opposition to the proposal to arm teachers due to the risks it could pose for students and law enforcement officers. And the president of the Major Cities Chiefs Association, representing 75 police forces from major metropolitan areas, states that the more guns that are coming into the equation, the more volatility and the more risk there is of someone getting hurt. Fear speaks to us. It tells us that more good guys with guns, the safer we'll be. But statistics and case studies speak louder. They tell us that in 160 active shooting situations studied by the FBI, only one was stopped by the intervention of an armed citizen, in that case a highly trained former U.S. Marine. 20 of those situations were stopped by unarmed civilians. In several recent incidents, law enforcement has noted that individuals drawing weapons in self-defense have created confusion and slowed down law enforcement's ability to effectively respond. Even professional police hit their intended target less than 20% of the time in an active shooter situation. Fear speaks to us, and we should be afraid. More people have been murdered in schools this year than have been killed while serving in the U.S. military this year. I agree we need to take measures to protect our school children from gun violence, but more guns in the hands of civilians gives us only the illusion of safety. Let's push back and encourage the state to properly fund the provisions that would allow schools to hire additionally highly trained law enforcement to have more of a presence on school campuses. I recognize that the school board is in an unenviable position with strong opinions on both sides of the school guardianship debate. Please know that if you vote against arming school personnel, the more than 4 million members of Everytown USA and Moms Demand Action will stand with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Board members, we are going to switch the topics of the board meeting this morning. So we're going to start with 3.03, which is the school safety discussion, because we realize that several members in our audience are here for that one. And then we'll move to 3.01 and 3.02 respectively. I'm going to invite the superintendent to discuss with us some of the options, and then Mr. Mathios, I'll turn it to you for a minute. Okay. Superintendent?
Good morning. First, I'd like to say that it is with even heavier hearts that we engage in this conversation this morning, following yet another school shooting and the tragic loss of such precious lives. And I know you join me in extending your thoughts and prayers to the families and all of that community that suffers today, and we suffer alongside them. Ms. Fontana, I'm sincerely, I'm just so sorry for your loss and just can't imagine what you and your family have been through. But yet today, here we are, and we will engage in this conversation knowing that at the end of the day, we are charged with making the best decision that we possibly can on behalf of our students. I applaud this board for taking the time to give this a lot of thought, to gather lots of input, and not making a hasty decision, knowing that this is probably one of the most important decisions that you all will make as a board. So we have taken a lot of time. I want to thank Mr. Johnson. He has worked alongside me very closely as we have looked at all of our options. He has helped me to really study the legislation. We've made lots of phone calls. Mr. Ward, our new CFO, came on board a week ago, and he has been entrenched in this as well, really looking at the dollars to help prepare the options for today. And so there was lots of folks who contributed to this work over the past several weeks as we've taken our time to bring you these options with a lot of thought, as well as adherence to the law, which was presented in a way that was challenging to interpret. And still, there's lots of questions, but we cannot continue to wait for answers. We've got to make some decisions. And so, first of all, Mr. Johnson has provided just a summary of the legislation, just to remind us again of what the legislation actually says. as well as some of the questions that he's been able to have answers to over the past several weeks. So I've asked him to just briefly go over the law so that we all understand what our options are before we engage in the options themselves. So, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, ma'am. On the board is a summary of part of chapter or session law 2018-3, which is the act that includes the provisions that require certain security measures to be taken by all school districts. The underline part, as I went through, I tried to underline things that either had to be done or were still rather vague and unclear as to what exactly you're supposed to do. The first part the first underlined section is that the school boards and the superintendents shall partner, that's mandatory, with law enforcement agencies, which means it's mandatory for both the school board and law enforcement agencies, to establish or assign. That phrase, establish or assign, has come into some question. Does assign mean that a individual is assigned to a school, or as being a school that they are responsible for dealing with in the course of a day, or does assign mean that person is in that school during all the times that the school is open? And then is it open? Is a officer or a security person assigned there during school bell times, or are they assigned there during all preschool and post-school activities as well? I will tell you that as of right now, most of the school districts in the state, I believe, are interpreting that to be that an individual has to be there during the day, assigned to that as being their primarily workstation, and assigned during the period from the first bell to the last bell. What has to be established or assigned? One or more safe school officers. It's fairly important when you're trying to think of what your options are to keep the names straight. You have SROs, which are school resource officers. Then you have SSOs, that are school safety officers. And then you have school guardians as part of the school guardian program. This is a safe school officers. It's none of those three, but I believe it to be a generic term for all of the various safety officers that are available. And then you're supposed to have a safe school officer at each school facility. Well, that immediately came into question as to we have a lot of school facilities where there's no students. Again, I believe that the majority, if not all, the other school districts in the state are interpreting that to be a school where our children being educated, not a bus facility or the district office or any other school facility. And that you may accomplish this by any combination of the following, and the following are three different things that are on that list. Number one is a school resource officer program. That requires a cooperative agreement with a law enforcement agency. Number two is commission of school safety officers, SSOs. Those can be in cooperation with law enforcement agencies or can be established by the school board. And the third option that was allowed under the statute was a participation in the school guardian program. The next page shows the requirement for SROs. They're fairly straightforward. Criminal background checks, drug testing, and psychological evaluation. The SROs are required to be certified law enforcement officers employed by a law enforcement agency, one of the distinctions between them and school safety officers. They must abide by district policies, but are subject to the jurisdiction of law enforcement where they're employed. And they have to complete mental health crisis intervention training. The second one are the requirements for school safety officers. Same criminal background checks, drug testing, and psychological evaluation. They have to be law enforcement officers the same way that SROs are law enforcement officers that are certified under 943. That's Chapter 943 of the Florida statutes. but they can be employed by either a law enforcement agency or the school board. If the school board hires the individual certified law enforcement officer, then the school board has all of the obligations that a law enforcement officer's employer does under the statutes and has to meet those obligations. Those are done, this is added on, can be done in a couple of different ways. School safety officers can be employed through a contract or agreement with a law enforcement agency that employs that individual. I mean, they may have, although not these days with this legislation passes, there's not a big surplus of certified law enforcement officers that aren't being used but they could be used as a full-time officer for the school district. Some of the counties you're aware of have what essentially is their own police departments, where under that scenario, they would hire school safety officers. They would act as the employer under the statute, and the school safety officer would be a direct employee of the school board as part of the, I mean, you don't have to have it as part of a police department, but as one method that you can accomplish that same thing. If you wanted to use the law enforcement officers through an agency that's already existing, if there were surplus law enforcement certified officers, then you could enter into a mutual aid agreement. The third option that the statute allows you to implement to satisfy the Safe Schools option is the school guardian program. Maybe. Yeah, that's it now. Okay. The school guardian program is established. The language is, quote, if the sheriff so chooses, close quote, to participate. If the sheriff does choose to participate, then the statute says the sheriff shall appoint the guardians. The authority that the guardians have is solely to prevent or abate an active assailant incident on school premises. They do not have any other law enforcement powers, such as to arrest or do anything of that nature. Participants, excluded individuals are classroom teachers, as defined in the statute. There is an exception to that exception, so that classroom teachers cannot be guardians unless the classroom teacher is also a teacher of a JROTC program, or is a current service member, or is a current or former law enforcement officer. So in those cases, those three cases are exceptions to the rule that classroom teachers can't be participating as school guardians.
So for clarification, former military is not an option under that.
No, sir, it's active.
It has to be active military.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, and I'll get that. There's a statutory definition of what a current service member is,
Okay.
Mr. Dunn. I've got that, and I'll get to
Okay. Thanks.
share that with you.
So it could be retired because they still carry a card. You're going to qualify that.
I'm going to look at I've printed, I hope, like, all the definitions for those things that were in here. So I'll make sure I've got that while you're all talking about it. The following are the guardian requirements. I put in here a statement, not necessarily pointed out for any particular reason other than I had heard some folks say that the sheriff was obligated to undertake the training. And I know that there's some funds available to the sheriffs, I believe, to do that. But nowhere in the statute does it specifically say that the sheriff is required to do the training. It outlines what the training is and tells you the standards they have to meet. I'm assuming that the sheriff would meet those standards, but it's not necessarily exclusive that you'd have to go that route. But the list of the 6 different items is up there. A valid license, that license is a handgun license, the 79006. 132 hours of firearm safety and proficiency training, and then it lists all the various A through F elements of that firearm training. Psychological evaluations, drug testing, random tests. Under the sheriff, 112-0455 would be the sheriff's drug-free workplace policy. Successful completion of annual training and successful completion of 12 hours of diversity training. If the guardian meets those requirements, then the sheriff, the statute says, shall issue a guardian certificate, and the sheriff shall maintain the necessary records on the weapons, inspections, training qualifications, all that kind of information. The compliance options, and I believe the superintendent's going to talk to you about them in a little different order, but this is just kind of giving you an overall view of all of them and how they interact. The compliance, the number one, the school resource officer, that can be, you can comply with that either by the sheriff providing school resource officers or the city providing resource officers, or a combination of the two. Or for that matter, any other law enforcement agency, the FBI or alcohol, firearms, tobacco, whoever else that you might have available. The number two, and number one, the important thing to remember that those are employees of the law enforcement agency. They're not employees of the school district. And in order to retain services under that particular option, you would enter into an agreement with the municipality or the county in order to, or whatever other agency you might be looking at in order to obtain those individuals. Number two, the school safety officer option can be a sheriff or a city police department. Again, what I left off of that one, however, was it can also be the school board as the employer of the school safety officer. And that can be done down on number 4 there is the school district police force. In the last couple of weeks, several additional counties have begun the process to be able to establish a police force for the purpose of being able to retain a certain number of school safety officers as employees of the school board and not the law enforcement agency. And then number 3 on that list is are the school board employees that are not teachers, with the exceptions. The kind of hybrid guardian program that's being utilized by a number of counties now is that there's no timing in the statute as to when they have to be employees. So rather than hire somebody who's an employee today for the next school year and have that particular individual qualify as a guardian, those counties are implementing new job descriptions for, and they're called several different things. I think we have one for Pasco County. They're calling it a school safety guard. So they are employees. They will be employees after you hire them, so they will qualify, and their job will be not as a supplement to their existing job as a administrator or athletic director or a different position that right now would be eligible for guardian. Their job would be to be a security person on campus who was employed by the school board, trained under the Guardian program, and certified by the sheriff under the Guardian program. The last option on their discussion is that outside servicing firm, security firm can be used. However, an outside security firm does not appear to have two things. One, does not appear to be eligible for refund of any of the, or for reimbursement of any of the monies under the specific sections that are allocating funds to the schools. And number two, it doesn't seem to fit within the 1, 2, and 3 categories, which are still the mandatory options that you have to be able to comply with the Safe School Directive. So with that, I'll let the superintendent talk to you about money.
And if money was not a limiting factor here, I think we would all agree that our best option is a highly trained and certified police officer in every one of our schools. But we are going to look at what the funding limitations are, equally as confusing in some regards as the legislation itself. So choice number one, which is a cooperative agreement with local law enforcement. I have this broken into two sections, which is option 1 and option 2. These were in board docs if you have access electronically to those, or they are on the screen. So the first option is a cooperative agreement with the local sheriff. What you'll see here is, first of all, our total school allocation for safe schools, which is the $2.2 million. Our charter schools do receive a portion of that, and so in our safe schools allocation, total available funding is $2 million. Now that is broken into two categories, and it's really important as we engage in this conversation that you keep in mind the two different funding categories and what can and cannot be used within each of these categories. So the first one is a categorical funding of $1.528847. It is provided within the FEFP, so we've already received these dollars, and the legislation says that this is for the purpose of additional resource officers, meaning that our current contract that we have with the Lake County Sheriff's Department for our middle and high schools, where we have SROs in every one of our schools, we cannot use those funds to cover the cost of the existing contract. Okay? The second pot of money, and then I show you there the portion of that goes to charters as well. So actually it's 1.3 left in that category. So the 1.336 are the available dollars for additional school resource officers only. That's one pot of money. The second pot of money is our safe schools allocation. You can see that that pot is $770,902, minus the portion that goes to the charter schools. And our current SRO contract that is projected for 18-19 is the $974,837. So remember, we can't use pot 1, so pot 2 will be used exclusively to pay our contract for our middle and high schools as it currently exists. And that does include the contract that we have with Mount Dora, because, you know, we contract with them separately, and they cover the middle and high schools in Mount Dora. So they are included in that. So that pot of money, there is a deficit for 18-19 of $301,069, and we cannot use, again, pot 1 to help cover that. So we already have a deficit in pot 2. So you can exclude our categorical safe schools allocation monies, because that's gone. That will be used for the contract, plus we will have to go into operational dollars to cover the existing amount of the contract that we don't have available there. If you'll remember, the quote that we got from the Sheriff's Department for the 22 new officers plus the 23, so that 974 is included in that amount, was $7.4 million. Okay? So I remind you again that we have 1.3 to use. The quote was $7.4 million. And our available funding for existing officers is a deficit of $301,000. So that's option number 1. As you can see, we would have a large amount of money, about $6 million to come up with if we were to put a Lake County Sheriff's officer in every one of our schools.
I think the one question I've heard often from the public is that if it only costs $1 million to do this first 22 or 23, why does it cost another 6-point-something million to do the other half? He provided a breakdown.
He did provide a breakdown. Now, this is a year 1 cost only, because in that year 1 cost were vehicles, the screenings, the equipment cost, and everything for new officers. And so that would be a year 1 cost. All of that would go away in year 2, and the salaries and benefits for officers is about $83,000. So it would be the $83,000.
Right now we're paying 29.
So right now, it is, yeah. Oh, yeah, and that's the other thing to keep in mind, yes, thank you for reminding me of that. The 83,000 is for 12 months. If you'll remember, the sheriff was concerned about being able to find enough deputies to be able to hire for just a nine-month contract. And so he does want the cost to cover the 12 months, which means that he would then have the officers available to help with some of our summer programs and things. So that was these new officers would be hired at 83,000 versus the 35,000 that we currently pay for those officers. Again, the year one cost is the majority of that to cover all the vehicles and equipment cost, but the salary is a good bit more than what we typically pay because he's wanting us to pay for 12 months.
So we would pay for the time when, let's say he were to use these deputies hypothetically during, when we don't have that many events going on over the summer to patrol the roads and other county functions, and the school district would pay that bill.
That's correct.
And we would we own the police cars? Is there an option to lease them back to the sheriff if we bought them, right?
So we're talking 300
Yeah,
and
the,
6,000 over that a year
Mhm.
per officer,
Yes,
the sheriff's proposal.
yes.
Stiff.
yep.
Okay. All right, and then we'll look at option number 2. Remember, again, agreement with local law enforcement. So I have reached out to each municipality. I've talked with their police chief, and in many cases, either the city manager was also involved in these conversations. And I asked each of them, now the Mount Dora contract that we have, we pay, it's about $34,000 per officer. They assume all the equipment costs, vehicles. There's no additional cost to the school district for any of that. So I provided them the Mount Dora contract, and I asked, would they be willing to engage in a similar contract as we have with Mount Dora? I can tell you, even before I began these conversations, I had many of them reaching out saying that they were very interested in working with the school district. They felt like covering the schools in their community was a good way to build community, as well as a show of support within each of the local cities. And so these were all met with very favorable responses. I can tell you, as we go through the list, you can see there I broke down, again, the $34,000 per officer for 16 of our schools, and I'll explain that in just a second. That was, the total cost would be $748,000. That was for all of them. However, if we go down and we look at each of the cities and the schools there that they would cover, we have 5 that lie outside of any city. Those are the 5 at the bottom: Seminole Springs, Treadway, Sawgrass Bay, Pine Ridge, and Grassy Lake, meaning that they are not under the jurisdiction of any of the local police departments. So those are all considered county schools, in which we would have to come up with additional options for those. But if we look at the others, I've reached out to Lady Lake. They're very interested in covering with a certified officer for villages. And you can see those that each of the cities have expressed an interest in covering, including Mount Dora, who said that if the sheriff would engage with an MOU to give them jurisdiction, they would actually pick up Sorrento for us, which was a huge help. So we appreciate them offering to do that. I think some of the others might be willing to pick up some of these other county schools, but they just need to, year one, they're making sure that they can cover their schools, as they would all be looking to hire new officers to fill these positions. The only one that has come back and said that they would not be able to engage in a contract was Fruitland Park. They too wanted us to pay vehicle cost, equipment cost, and if we were going to go that route, then we would end up basically with the same deal, maybe a little less than what we were paying the sheriff. So that's the only one that has come back to say that they didn't feel like they could engage with us in a contract. All the others are extremely interested. They are in a position now where they're going back for a vote with their city commission in each of these cities, asking for support. But I can tell you the police chiefs have been extremely gracious and have been real privileged sitting down with them and engaging in conversation about how we can jointly protect our schools. And they are willing to accept the contract that I provided them as a sample. At this point, we'll see what each of the city managers and city commissioners come back with in terms of support for that. So you can see that we would be looking, again, If we can cover the 6 schools at a breakdown cost of about $126,500 each, that's $759,000 to cover the 6 schools, and I'm saying 6 because the 5 at the bottom plus now Fruitland Park that I threw in there, that we might have to look at another option for. That would be one option. And then the $34,000 for the other 16 schools, that's $544,000. The total of that is at 1.3, which is exactly what we have. That is assuming that we can get the county officers at a little bit lower cost as we continue to work with the sheriff to see if we can't negotiate a lower price for the officers, and then the city's agreeing to provide their own resource officers for their schools at $34,000 as we do with Mount Dora. Okay, so that's option number 2. And those are the options for covering our first compliance option, saying the word option a lot, which is an SRO or a certified law enforcement officer in every school.
So, okay, clarification on this, can't use for new contracts. Some of these schools that we have currently under contract with the Lake County Sheriff's Office fall into one of these local municipalities. Could we take a deputy from there and move them to one of these county schools and then fill that school with now the vacancy with somebody from local?
The cities right now are, because everyone is going to be posting the same positions and hiring from the
That
same
stretches
pool
them
of
enough.
money.
Sure.
They're concerned in year one. I think that ultimately they would be very interested in covering all of their schools if we decided we wanted to go that route. I think right now they feel hard pressed to be able to fill the positions that they have.
All right.
So I think it's a process, but I do think ultimately that we might want to consider that. All right, so option number 3, this was to commission one or more school safety officers. And essentially, this is the school district police force, because it says that the folks must be either employed by local law enforcement, and we just talked about that one, or they have to be employed by the school district, which is essentially your own school police force. We have the equipment and screening costs per officer. You can see that the total, and again, this is using that 22 officers that would cover each of our elementary schools plus Lake Hills. That is the equipment and screening cost. I used a salary of $18 per hour, which seems to be the average in this area, plus the benefits. One of the things that we had to include here is the FRS contribution because of the position that these people hold. It puts them in a higher bracket, which is a 24.5% FRS contribution, so it's much higher than we pay for other positions. Then you see the benefits, and also I worked with Lauren DeRitter, who got us a cost of the liability insurance, the additional liability insurance, which was, that you'll see added in there as well. And you can see the total cost at $941,000. Again, this is an estimate based on $18 an hour, which seems to be the competitive going rate plus all of the benefits there. I'm going to tell you, I don't think this is a really good option for us as a school district to try and hire 22 certified law enforcement officers. I don't think if the cities and local municipalities are going to struggle to do that, I'm not sure how we would do that. Unless we could find retired officers who only want to work part-time. And I know there are some in this community, but again, I think that those might be some of the same individuals who would be possibly hired in some of our city positions. And these would be our employees. Districts that have their own police departments, you'll find, are much larger districts, and that it's been a process that they've developed over time and not something that they were able to do in the short period of time that we would be looking to fill those options. But I wanted you to see what it looked like, since it was one of the things that the legislation did allow for.
So then hypothetically, under this option, the guy from Claremont Elementary one day is sick and can't show up. We're in charge of finding another school safety officer to show up that day, right? So we've got to obviously have extras.
That would be up to us, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus the Claremont Police Department might have another officer they could easily send
Right.
in his absence.
We're only figuring,
Got it.
we're only figuring 22. We would obviously have to have some overhead. Like, there has to be somebody in charge of 22 officers, right?
Correct, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I should have said that from the very beginning. The requirement in legislation, if you'll remember, is that every school district must hire a district safety coordinator that oversees, regardless of what option we choose, that in legislation, we have to hire that individual. And there are specific requirements that that person needs to meet as well, and I can provide you all of that information.
Some counties have used that as the police chief in their concept of how they're putting this together. And just another, the school safety officer. I mean, you can just hire one or two. You don't have to hire an entire police force by doing that to use as you see fit for other things. So that's also an option that's available.
And he brings up a good point. Remember, any of these, there are hybrid models where you can pick and choose. This is a menu from any and all of these options as we build this. And then option number 4 really has 2 parts, and this was what Mr. Johnson was describing to you earlier. Option number 4 is the Straight Guardian Program as defined in legislation. You can see there that we would have the equipment and screening cost, and that was provided to me by the sheriff in regards to the equipment that we would need for the individual, as well as the screening. That's the psychological screening, the drug screening, and the other things that were mentioned in legislation, background checks, fingerprinting. You can see the cost there. And then the training cost, again, was also provided to me by the sheriff, who is willing to engage and work with us to train these guardians. He's already committed to that if we would so like him to do so. As you can see the training costs there. There is some reimbursement from the state for each individual who is trained. Remember, they receive a $500 supplement. They also receive, and we have not officially gotten the number, but I was told by the DOE that it was about $1,800 per guardian that would then go to the sheriff. So in legislation, it says that the sheriff will report to the governor by July 1st, however many guardians are going to be trained within a school district, and then he will receive directly the reimbursement for the training. So based on that $1,800 figure, we can see there the training cost plus the equipment and screening for the guardians, because these are our employees, so there's no additional salaries and benefits added, is $84,736.
And that's general fund, right? Because that's what's left over.
That's correct, yes. We'll get the sheriff will get the training dollars, then the supplement will go directly to the individual. There are no additional dollars because our Safe Schools money has been used, and that was what that money was to be for. But we don't have any additional Safe Schools money, so we would have to pay for that out of general funds. And then the other option is kind of the hybrid guardian program, which is we could hire a new individual whose sole responsibility is to serve as a school guardian or school officer. These could be individuals. We can set the criteria, so you might have former law enforcement, you might have current former military. However, Mr. Johnson defines that for us, active military. Individuals who apply for that. I know he's reached out to other school districts to look at an application process, what they might be using, because we know that others are using this option. And then I also provided to you a job description for these folks that's in front of you that we received as a sample from Polk County that they're using, and I think that's one that many school districts are using as the job description for these folks. So these are new employees who serve in a guardian capacity, meaning that we can recoup the training dollars, again, going straight to the sheriff, but these would be new employees. I put a amount of $15 per hour. We can decide that we can pay more or less, whatever you feel, but that seemed to be what a lot of districts were using in terms of a salary and benefit cost. And you'll see the benefits, total cost $758,255. And again, that gives us, and we have 1.3, So there is some additional dollars there, one, to hire the district safety specialist out of that pot, as well as any combination, if we want to hire more resource officers who want to engage in. So again, from the menu, we've got some additional dollars there if we want to add some additional certified officers in addition to some of these new guardians. One of the things that I'd asked Mr. Johnson to look into was the request from our charter schools who wanted to engage in one of these options. They do not have to. Do you want to speak to that since you looked into that?
Yeah, just that the charter schools are receiving a proportionate share of their funds, and it's, I believe it's the fairly unanimous decision of most of the other school districts that charter schools are being given that money, and the schools, assuming that there's no non-compliance with the statute in their plan for their security on their school, then the sponsor, which is the school district, would approve their plan, and they would send it on to the state. As a matter of fact, under the mental health part of this whole plan, it specifically calls for that process, that the charter schools submit their plans for the expenditure of the money that's allocated to them under the act to the school district, and then the school district passes it along to the Department of Education. So they will, and the information I have is that some of them have already made their arrangements as necessary to be able to utilize their proportionate share of this money for the security that they feel necessary. I was looking at it, I thought that the only issue that might come up is really going to be the sheriff's issue, if that would be a decision that he would have to make on whether or not he was going to allow a guardian program, I guess, at the individual charter schools. But that's not our decision to make for those charters as to whether they want to do that or not.
In option 4, how come there's no change in liability? Wouldn't those people have a change in their FRS and their liability by being popped into different positions?
And Mr. Ward will speak to that. He researched the liability costs for us.
My understanding from our Director of Risk Management is the liability would be considered the same whether it was a security guard or a police officer. The insurance companies look at them basically doing the same kind of work, so the rates would be very similar. But the FRS is the same as a normal employee of the school district because they're not certified law enforcement, therefore they do not meet the criteria of high risk for FRS. So you can see that's one of the biggest cost savings between the two categories is there's a much less cost for the FRS contribution from the district if it's a district employee and not law enforcement. Any other questions? Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that we have been working on, our county commissioners are working alongside us. I know that they too are very concerned about how we support our schools and making sure that we make our schools as safe as possible. I want to thank Commissioner Campion for being here this morning as they partner with us really in this decision-making process. With that, one of the things that we wanted to look at, I'll turn over to Mr. Mathias to kind of explain some of the work that he's done in this area and invite his guest up.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Chair. Reflecting on this meeting today and how serious this is, protecting our kids, at the beginning of this conversation, there were 43 lives lost since I first took office. And today, as I sit here, there's 53. So what we do to protect our kids, I don't think there's any more important role that we will be showing the leadership. I want to recognize we have the Vice Chair from the Board of County Commissions, Leslie Campion. How are you doing? And then I want to speak to, as we were trying to get input and beginning to gather information, there were 3 surveys done. Those surveys were initially restricted to our internal staff, about 2,500 respondents. We then went for a stakeholder survey that was sent to throughout the universe. And then we had our high school kids weigh in. And our high school kids, I will say this, that besides the fact that they were able to, on their own, garner the questions, implement the survey, they came back with recommendations that weren't seated in the emotion that I think some have spoken about, but it was based on the data and what's best to protect the kids. With that said, I thought, because there's been criticism, depends on how the survey came out, how you liked it or didn't. And I see Mr. McNiff, and you were called biased on more than one occasion, depending on the side. I went out, this is such an important decision for me and the board, but I hired a research company to really find out scientifically, because that's been the big criticism, that anyone with a bias could approach either or any of the surveys. And so I brought on board Mere Research. And as I was speaking to the president, Alex Patton, who's with us, that numbers become confusing, and the way that he is able to explain them, I felt was important, and so the chair allowed me to bring him in today. So with that said, Mr. Patton, if you want to move, I don't know where we want him at. You can move to the podium or to the front.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I will tell you that this was a very challenging survey instrument to write. And our goal and our challenge was to take a 105-page bill that your attorney and your superintendent distilled down to an hour summary, and we had to take it in turn and try to distill it down to a 15, 17-minute poll. And so it was a little bit challenging. And so my goal here today is to be, thank you, is to be transparent. The question wording that you will see is the verbatim question wording that was asked of the respondents, and you can adjust it in your head kind of accordingly. So how we did this, our methodology, the survey was conducted basically last week, May 14th through the 18th, using telephone interviews conducted by live callers. Survey respondents are active registered voters in Lake County. Now, the completed interviews, roughly 70% were landlines, 30% were cell phones. So our poll has a total respondents of 353, which puts our margin of error at plus or minus 5.21% for any number that you will see. So, and that's within a 95% confidence interval. So that's essentially how we conducted the poll, when we conducted the poll. One of the questions that's come up is you polled on May 18th. That is the day of the Texas incident. And so the question is, how would that affect the polling? That was at the very tail end of our data collection. There were very few respondents that were collected Friday evening. So it really, when we looked at it, was there a difference between any respondents on Friday and the overall trends, the answer is no. So I do think that anything that was there would be negligible. And when you see the results, I think you'll probably be able to look at it. So how we looked at it, as our demographics of our respondents were 51% female, 49% male. That's typical in any type of voter registration because females tend to be smarter, vote more, and are engaged. On our registration breakdown per party, 45% Republican, 31% Democrat, 22% other. That again reflects what is going on in Lake County. Of our respondents, 18% were under the age of 34, 20% roughly 35 to 49, 27% 50 to 64, and 35% are older than 65. So again, this is difficult, and the poll is kind of breaking down into three sections, I think. One is kind of some overall general attitudes towards school safety and guns on campus. The second part that we tried to delve into was a little bit more of the price sensitivity and the numbers that are involved. So again, these are verbatim taken from the poll. Thinking about schools in Lake County, the current security measures that are in place, how well are the Lake County schools protected from shooters entering the school? And so what you will find here is our protected outnumbers are not too protected, about 42 to 25, about 2 to 1. What's interesting, though, is one of the things that we're always interested in when we ask things in a 5-point scale is what's the intensity, right? How does the very protected really differ from the not protected at all? And there you will see it's roughly about the same within the margin of error. So most people, in general, think that the schools are protected. An armed shooter.
Can I ask one quick question? I don't want to sidetrack you too much. But did you also find out how many of your respondents have children in one of our schools, or have?
We did.
Okay.
And
Yeah. How does that shake out?
In what sense?
What's the number?
How many of your respondents
Of
had,
our respondents, about 40% said they had a gun in the household.
no, had children in one of our schools?
I did not ask that.
Oh, okay. That'd be good to know.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. If an armed shooter were able to enter a Lake County school, how prepared do you think the school would be to protect students and staff inside the building? Here we see, obviously, a greater increase, a little bit of the unsure, but you see the same pattern really involved. For the most part, it's roughly broken down about even, right? Not a whole lot of intensity, but generally somewhat prepared. So here's where, again, we're trying to get into some overall general attitudes. Do you support or oppose current military service members who are teachers to be allowed to carry a firearm on campus? So again, we wanted to ask who are teachers. So current military who are teachers. This is where we see the intensity really rise. In general, we see 65 to 31% in support of current military service members, but the intensity is on the strongly support. You're looking at 50 to 23. That's a ratio of 2 to 1. Generally, what you're going to see in our results, again, we're painting with a broad brush because of the difficulty of pulling this information. Your strongly opposed is going to equal roughly a quarter on most of these things. You support or oppose former law enforcement officers who are current teachers to allowed to be carrying a firearm on campus. Again, we see the same broad pattern emerge. 70 to 20 or 70 to 30. Strongly support outnumbering the strongly oppose roughly 2 to 1. Do you support or oppose Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps, also known as ROTC teachers, to be allowed to carry a firearm on campus? This is where you see the support drop. And this, I think, is really illustrative a lot of times of how we talk about these issues is important. Because if you call an ROTC teacher a current reservist or current military officer, then we're back there. If you just refer to them as an ROTC teacher, then the support drops. Why that is, I don't know, but that's how the public thinks about things. So again, that one's much, much softer than the other two that we looked at. Generally, do you support or oppose adding sheriff's deputies in schools? That is a big number. 87 to 10, 8 to 1, 9 to 1, with almost all the intensity in the strongly support. Do you support or oppose adding non-deputy security personnel? This was a difficult question. You know, we don't have the ability to go into SSO, or SRO, what's the difference, who pays for what, all that type of thing. So we just have to try to make it as plain English as we can. When we do that and we call these people non-deputy security personnel, you do see the support drop. Drops roughly split between support and oppose. The next part of the question, we're trying to get into price sensitivity and to the current law. So there was a preamble that we read to all of these questions, which is, as you may know, a new gun law recently took effect in Florida. This new law offers several options to local officials to choose from in order to improve school safety. Each option has a different cost to taxpayers. Please tell me if you support or oppose these options I read to you. So again, this is a complex question. Do you support or oppose spending $7.4 million local tax dollars annually to place one sheriff's deputy in each Lake County schools? A lot of things going on there, but again, I think the thing that jumps out at you is 7.4 sheriff's deputy. 70 to 30% support that option, even with that price tag attached. And again, strongly support to strongly oppose outnumber greatly. The intensity is on the support side. Do you support or oppose spending $900,000, again, we're trying to use round numbers, local tax dollars annually to place one non-deputy security personnel in each Lake County schools? There again, you see the support drop. And this is where the strongly opposed, one of the few questions where the strongly opposed is actually more intense than the strongly support. And finally, do you support or oppose spending zero tax dollars to have the Sheriff's Department train and certify 3 school personnel who are not teachers in each Lake County schools to carry and use a firearm? This one, again, you do see support, 58 to 35. It does drop when compared. So that's kind of a general brush on all 3 of the major options that were offered. Then what we try to do is say, okay, Mr. Public, if you had to choose between one of the three options, and they were mutually exclusive, which one would you choose? And in this case, 45% went for 7.4 million, 14% for non-deputy security personnel, and 31% for zero cost to train and arm school personnel who are not teachers. 4% wouldn't choose anything, and 6% are unsure, right? This next number's a mistake, you can ignore that. And then this number I actually found quite shocking. Please tell me if you would be very willing, somewhat willing, not very willing, or not willing at all to see a small tax increase in the taxes you pay for additional sheriff's deputies in the school. 7.4 million is a big number. Are you willing to pay for it, public? What we found is that 73% of the public is willing to support some small tax increase to pay for that benefit. And again, very willing versus not willing at all, almost 2 to 1. That's a big number, you know, and especially if you're looking at any type of tax referendum, you'll want any type of tax referendum to start at 60% or higher, is a general rule of thumb to have a chance of success. But that's starting out at 73%. You know, so I think in total, and again, difficult to poll, and we can quibble about some of the polling of the wording, but I think if you look at the broad brushes, right, how we talk about these issues is law enforcement gets general higher approval, and the Guardian program does have some approval, but more importantly, I think taxpayers in Lake County have indicated their willingness to pay for this. So that is the broad strokes, and that's where I can answer any questions.
You had 353 respondents, you
Yes, ma'am.
said, and you guys would consider that statistically significant in
Yes,
our
that gives you a
population?
margin of error of 5.21%, plus or
really
minus.
And what about your demographics? How do they match the demographics? Because it appeared that like 50% at least were over 50. 50 or over. You flew past the numbers pretty fast.
This matches
That's more than, yeah, so 50,
Relatively-
62.
relatively within a point or two what your voter registration is in Lake County. So racially, everything is right on within acceptable parameters.
Can we get this survey? I mean, it's obviously public information now, we can rewatch it, but it'd be really nice to have the numbers in front of us when we're considering different.
Yeah, the presentation is
Yeah, Natalie has
provided
it.
to the clerk.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Pat.
So at this point in time, I'd like to open it up for discussion. Board members, I know we have lots of questions and conversation to have, so. I did want to ask, Mr. Johnson, did you, I know we spoke about the exception to the participants in the Guardian, a current service member. So they have to be a current service member, but can be a former law enforcement officer, is that correct?
The current service member or current or former law enforcement officer.
But a current service member, so it can't be a retired military.
And I was just, and I've got
service.
that statute that they refer to the definition of a current service member in 25001. And of course, it doesn't say what a current service member is, but it does have the definition for a service member, and that person has to be on active duty. So that would be the limitation.
So not.
But what, the conflict there is that they're on active duty, chances are pretty good they're not located in
I don't know
Leesburg,
how they're
Florida.
teaching. Yes, I agree completely.
And they wouldn't be teaching, so.
But that's not the only, not the only part of the statute that has that issue in it.
Just put together in 3 weeks.
Well,
Right.
and my question also, I know we have Spring Creek Charter School, and I was actually gonna tell you guys this in my board member comments, but I'll tell you now that Mr. Locke had actually contacted me yesterday and said that he was in a meeting this morning and would be unable
He's
to
here.
attend. He's here. I will give you your 3 minutes if you would like it, and I'm gonna qualify this to the public because 3 minutes, especially with this topic, and we've seen where we've had 2 hours of public input, but Mr. Locke did contact me yesterday and I explained that I would give his comments. So in lieu of me giving you your comments, I would love for you to come up and take your 3 minutes to explain it. But my question, while he's speaking, getting ready to speak, would be if he is former military, would that then disqualify him? So that's a question I have. It does sound like it does, but that's a,
No, it does
No.
disqualify Mr. Locke?
yes.
as
No,
former
that's
military.
the military issues are exceptions to being a classroom teacher.
Okay, got it.
Mr. Locke's not a classroom teacher, so
Got it.
he's not accepted from that.
So, an administrator, any administrator would count for the guardian?
I don't see that.
You start with
I'm
it
confused.
can't be a classroom teacher,
Right.
is one of the rule. Then there is an exception to that rule.
Okay.
Oh, yes, you can be a classroom teacher if you are a current service member or a current or former law enforcement officer.
So, okay, in theory, Miss O'Neill at his school could be a guardian.
She's non-load bearing.
She's non-load bearing.
So
and
so
she
she's not
is-
a classroom teacher, so yes, she would qualify.
Got it.
Okay.
So, so if you're not a classroom teacher, you don't need former or current military experience. You
Exactly.
don't need any current or former law enforcement experience.
Correct.
Just an interest and past all that other stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Locke.
Thanks for giving me the 3
I
minutes.
didn't see you come in. I apologize.
I was at Title I meeting getting audited, so that's where I was this morning. I just wanted to point out that on May 8th, the Spring Creek Charter Board voted 5-0 to approve the use of the school guardian program at Spring Creek on the condition that we obtain permission from the Lake County School Board. They made this decision based on input from staff, parents, and community members. They held a special meeting to receive feedback from staff, another special meeting to receive feedback from parents. They also conducted multiple surveys, as you all did. 72% of our staff are in favor of the Guardian program. 94% of our parents polled are in favor. I believe these high numbers stem from one reason and one reason only, our location. Spring Creek is a very rural school, and if something were to occur on our campus, we're looking at a minimum of 10-minute response time from any law enforcement agency. If we're lucky, we're at 10 minutes. And this is from my discussions when we hired a school resource officer with Sheriff Borders at the time. He told me he wants a resource officer at our school because he can't guarantee that he can have anybody there within 10 minutes. He said if we're lucky, 10 minutes, it could be 25. Well, 25 minutes in a active shooter situation is many lifetimes. That's not just one lifetime. That's a lot of lifetimes. So I know you all know our unique situation, where we are. And I hope you know my character and my efforts that I would take to make sure that if this program was utilized at Spring Creek, it would be done professionally, carefully, and with as much safety of students involved as possible, without a doubt. I also want you all to know this is not our only response to school safety. We continue to utilize Responsive Classroom to teach our students to show cooperation with others, to work out tasks, to be assertive when they hear things to be concerned about, to be responsible for their behavior, and to have empathy when others have problems or issues, and to use self-control so they know how to handle situations. I've also committed to hiring another guidance counselor at Spring Creek next year. We'll have actually 3 certified guidance counselors on staff. 2 of them will be nothing but guidance counselors, and that gives me 1 guidance counselor per 300 kids. And their job's going to be, let's talk to these kids and make sure we get them the help they need. So we're taking the threats to our students seriously, and we just ask that you give us the use of the school guardian program as our last line of defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Locke. Okay. All right. Board members. Board members.
You did just happen to come to me as a current service member. Current service member, why that would be, aren't your ROTC teachers sometimes current service folks that are on active duty and serving as teachers at ROTC? I think that's what it was for.
Is reserve status considered active if you're on reserves? Is that active? I don't know. I'm only asking, I know at Umatilla
I
Middle
looked up
School, we have
ROTC.
we have a PE teacher for our Umatilla Middle School, who is on, he was actually out for 2 weeks because he was on.
He's a
active duty.
reservist. So
He's a
it could be a
reservist,
military
that's right, he's a
reserve.
reservist.
That
And
is
they have
considered
state
active.
active.
Considered active, I guess.
State active duty is part of one of the two.
Back when I served, if you were a reservist, you weren't necessarily considered active then. So I'm not certain.
That's
I think we need an interpretation of that, but we can move on to the discussion as we move forward, I think. So, you want me to lead out?
Yeah, I just know we were talking about teachers being active
Right.
or reservist and whatever, and we do have some, we absolutely do have a couple.
But- Well, I think within the options that we're faced with, that the hybrid for me, and as we have evolved together, speaking and garnering information, that I think it is, I'm looking for more of a hybrid version. I believe that we need a police officer on every campus, That I then would like to see that we would have a guardian program, but we would exclude, at least for the time being, teachers, period. Move them out of the discussion, and that they would be non-load-bearing personnel that could support, as we saw in Texas, where immediately the resource officer was incapacitated. And now, there were backup officers that arrived. But in my world, it would be, should that first line be taken out, that we would then still have a protected school. That's where I'm landing on this.
I want to be clear, for me at least, this isn't about the Second Amendment
Right.
or Trump.
Right.
I don't think it's a conservative or a liberal issue. I think it's an American problem. But, and I promised my conservative friends I would listen very carefully and take all sides of the issue, and I have for what feels like very many months now. But I'm still very concerned by the Guardian program. I feel like it introduces an element of risk into the schools that we wouldn't have otherwise. That we know a home, like statistically, we know that homes with guns have a higher chance of having small children be shot. Like, that's a statistical, like, known fact. As much as people want. There's the concealed carry mom who had the 2-year-old kill her. I mean, we know these things happen. And I feel like this is actually a response out of fear, and that we have to look at the situation more objectively, which is hard as a parent. I get the fear. I have 4. I get it. I get it for every single one of my kids. But I think we have to look at it really objectively. And I feel like adding more guns to a situation where there's a possibility of ricochets and glass breaking and crossfire with potentially somewhat trained individuals, because they're not that trained with 8 hours in active shooting training. That's not a lot of time of active shooter training. We're not talking about necessarily ex-military. And so I have a lot of, I'm very concerned by this program.
Well, option 2 seems like a no-brainer.
I'm in
You know-
favor of option 2 for sure.
I mean, even if you take those 5 county schools and you've got the deputy there at the higher cost than the local police agency, I think the math does work out to be that we just about break even with the new funds that we receive. We look at, well, the data that we saw today, the amount of trust that goes into that, seeing somebody from law enforcement there. I know, and I sat out in the audience there when Mount Dora had approached the school board, begging and pleading to enter into that relationship. The board had a leap of faith at the time, which I think was a very good one, and has resulted in a very positive relationship there. As I view the idea of the school as a cornerstone of the community, I think a local police agency is just a great link to further build that link to the community. And so I'm just so pleased to see so many local agencies recognizing that link and wanting to be part of that. So kudos to all these agencies that said yes, that we'd love to do that. Clearly for me, that option 2 is a no-brainer.
I'd like to say that I fully support fully trained officers in our schools.
I would want, with option 2, I think it would be in our best interest to go back and renegotiate. And please correct me if I wrote that down wrong, but what I'm thinking is the cost per officer is $748,000 for the cities that are willing to cooperate. And there was additional $700,000 for the 5 schools at the bottom.
For the 6, yes.
6 schools at the bottom. So I know that in the sheriff's budget, he included like the cost of a car, where we're suggesting that at the villages and Rhymes, Beverly Shores, Leesburg, et cetera, that we wouldn't have a car present. So are those things that we could go back to the table then with the sheriff and say, this is what we're providing in all of these schools, and we would like a quote that would be similar to that within his request as well. Does that make sense?
Did you just say that Rhines and them wouldn't have a car?
Well, I'm not sure, we wouldn't be supplying the car.
Right,
We
that's,
wouldn't.
that's what I understood.
And
Right.
several of them said that they had extra vehicles in their fleet, or even if it's maybe not the top end, they had some older vehicles that they could place in front of the schools,
So at
that
least
those
in that discussion.
officers could use, yes. So, only Fruitland Park asked that we pay for them. But
Right.
all the others mentioned that none of them have come back and said that they wanted us to pay any of the additional costs. Again, remember, they do have to go back and get the approval from each of the cities. We just know that we have the chiefs on board.
We're looking at $11,000 difference though in those variables. So we have, majority of our schools are covered by $748,000, and we have these 6 that are remaining at the bottom that are the same exact cost, which seems like we might have some
Which
bargaining.
we may be able to
power.
talk to Eustis for Seminole Springs, maybe,
Right.
you know.
Well, we talked about that too as an option later.
And that would be up to the sheriff to allow them to have a MOU to do that. I sat with the superintendent Friday afternoon with Tavares PD, the chief and his lieutenant or captain, and listened to their conversation, and he was very happy to try and very pleased to try to do whatever he can to help initiate this. Also, I was Friday night with the chief of police from Mount Dora and the mayor from Mount Dora and the resource officer at Leesburg High School there because of graduation, and spoke with them. The mayor is very much behind the program, and the chief is very much there as well. And they have a program of a grant that they could go to try to get some funding to help them with this. And so they're trying to pass that on to the other agencies that would be involved to try to help cut some of the costs on their side. And that's why they would be able to absorb some of it. And also that they would like to enter into a teaching program during the same time. Years ago, we had a program in the elementary schools especially called DARE. There's another program out there now that's available that's a little better, they say, and they would try to introduce that as well. So it's not just something that we have that, but they would also be available for other things, but they're there for our safety. I'm very strongly, I like the second part about the police officers. The thing that was brought up, though, was police officers that are retired, if they didn't keep their certification, they would not be qualified because you can't be an officer without that. And I've talked to some retired officers that have allowed their certifications to expire, and it's just too costly for them to go and try to redo that anymore. But I'm for we're going to have to do something, and today is not a day that we're actually taking a vote, but just getting all the information together so we can bring it back at another time is what I understand.
That's correct.
Okay.
How do we feel about charters? In general, charters are allowed to just they have their own boards, they have their own public input, and they have generally allowed to make their own decisions.
But can our conversions make a decision outside of, or does that have to be part of the district?
Making decisions about.
If we say we want or don't want Guardian, could Spring Creek put in a Guardian as a conversion?
I think that the conversion charters can put in for them either way, whichever way the school district went. I don't think as what I said, the issue really for the charters who want to do that is not, I don't think, with the school board, because I would advise you that their decisions on how they deal with their safety are just like their decisions on how they deal with their curriculum and other issues. They're fairly autonomous. So the big issue would be whether if the school district didn't ask for the Guardian program, would the sheriff do it for the individuals?
With the exception that in the conversions, those are our employees too. We're paying for
Yes,
that.
sir. And
But it's their funding, and it's their decision to make. And so I guess the thing about our conversions as well is that our students voluntarily go there. Nobody's required to. So should I be or somebody be the parent of a kid, and that charter school has made a decision that I don't agree with, well, that's the world of school choice, right? And I can go back to a district school, whereas at a district school, it doesn't always work the other way, right? You're stuck with whatever decision the
But if we
board
allow the
made.
guardian, doesn't mean that there's a guardian anyway, that we won't be speaking about it in the public, how protected or lack of protected our schools are, as a general rule.
Well, they'd see whether or not there's a deputy there, right?
No, I think we're gonna do the deputy. I think there's a consensus there.
So you're saying this would be like a secret decision, nobody would know if there's a guardian on campus?
That's sort of what safety and security is about.
Can we do that?
Why is it secret? I don't even know why it has to be secret. Like,
But
you
we
can
have,
make your own-
we have
about
the
specifically what
policy
we
in place. In
can
other words,
and
if we
can't
said we're
do.
gonna
Well,
allow
no, we couldn't have the
guardians.
conversation apparently in an executive.
No, 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 no.
meeting.
No, no, no.
Can't have
It
one.
is, here's what I mean by that. If we have the Guardian program, then we're not going to talk specifically about numbers, or the sign would change to may be protected. That we're not going to speak about how many guardians are on a specific campus, or we may have campuses with none. That's not something we would broadcast, that's all.
Right, I understand that.
No, I think the public would probably take care of doing that for us. I recall that teacher who came up and said 132 hours, we're going to notice who's missing. Even if they do it over summer, it's impossible to not know that somebody has gone through the amount of training to be part of the Guardian program, right?
Well, and if you go the route of the hybrid
Easily.
program, you're going to have a specific person in a specific job description.
That's right.
That's if we did the hybrid. My other question about the Guardian program too, and this would be specific to Mr. Locks, because of his background is one of the reasons that and his location, which he spoke about. My personal feelings would be to allow him to be the guardian at that school. However, if he retires in the next 5 years and has a new administrator take over that doesn't have his background and that doesn't have his military training, then does that Guardian program stay in place for that specific school? Does their board have to vote again for that school? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want it to just automatically pass.
But we've said what the criteria is to be a guardian.
Right.
And that if his school elected to adopt the Guardian program, you have to have the people that qualify, or it doesn't exist.
But they don't necessarily have to be, and like we just talked about, non-classroom based teachers could just go through this training program to become a guardian. They don't have to be former military or have the training that Mr. Locke has supposedly. Do you know what I'm saying? So, like, let's just use his assistant principal now, who is not former military, who's not former law enforcement, but let's just say she wanted to be a guardian. She could go through this program and become a guardian. I don't
Right.
know that would be favorable in my opinion. Mr. Locke's favorable because I know him, I know his background and his training. In addition to the Guardian program, that's just this, you know what I mean? That's the
But-
hinger for me.
But we get back to, it's a charter school.
Yeah, I know.
You don't get to decide all of their personnel allocations.
But this
Right.
is actually good news for Spring Creek, I think, this discussion, number one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But number two, using him as the model,
example.
it helps us to.
Yeah, it does.
Kind of, you don't mind being the test case.
Supposed to be
Yeah.
innovative.
It does say in the legislation that, and you had it underlined, that, and this was something I thought was interesting, that it said the sheriff shall appoint school guardians.
Yeah.
Does that mean,
If he agrees to do it and if the guardians are qualified,
does he decide whether or not Mr. Locke is, it is then the sheriff's choice?
Yes.
whether Mr. Locke
Whether-
qualifies, and it qualifies as a guardian means that he is allowed to carry a weapon or have access to a weapon on school property.
That'd be for anybody in the Guardian program.
Yeah.
So like,
As long as they have the appropriate
we
license.
don't
don't do
have
anything. Right.
if, that choice.
Right.
You don't
I mean,
have-
even if it wasn't a charter.
You don't have
we
what
get that
choice?
We don't get to say, yes, they qualify to be a guardian, that's up to.
Which I think is a little
sheriff or not.
concerning, frankly, because sometimes we know, if somebody is having a crisis, we might be aware of it, and they might not have something on the record.
Well, you're going to have an application process for your employees who are working in your district schools, and you will have some process of selecting people through that. You're not going to have everybody who applies, I assume you're not going to allow them to go through the training and have 30 guardians at one school.
So then so he appoints them, but we can select them somehow?
So there's some filtering that occurs on our.
You don't have anything to do with selecting Mr.
Poor Mr.
Locke's
Locke.
No, we're
employees.
using him, we're using him as the
Aside
example.
from him.
Okay.
Aside from him.
Aside from him, you will have at a school, Tavares Elementary School, you will put out, I assume at some point in time, if you were going down this road of the Guardian program, you would put out a request for people to apply for a position of guardian. You would decide how many you were going to have at each elementary school. You would have an application, and then there would be some criteria for making a decision whether we're going to let this one and this one go through the training. That's all that we're going to do right now.
In the teacher survey, there were 294 people that responded, I think it was 294, that said that they would volunteer.
I thought it was like 500.
It was like 500.
500 and something.
It was
500
crazy
something.
It was crazy.
That
high.
doesn't mean that they would qualify,
That's
number
right.
one.
That's
And,
probably true.
and you would then have to split those up between different schools, because we don't need 30 at one school and 2 at another.
What happens in the case of somebody, if we have the Guardian program, and they have gone through the training, and they have gone through the mental health screening, and they're fine, and they've done a great
They
job for a
passed.
year, okay? And somebody in their life dies, or some horrific event in their life happens, and they become, let's say, mentally less stable. What happens in that situation? Who is in charge of that?
What happens in your situation to one of your employees that you have right now if that happens?
Well, right now, our employees don't have guns. So, and they're gonna throw chalk at kids.
The psychological evaluation is in there to determine, to screen certain people out.
Is that annually?
We-
or is it
we-
just one time?
Is it,
You know, I don't
That's a
remember.
better question. So is it something that's repeated, or is it just a?
Because I know that there's successful completion
it
of
was-
annual training, but we don't require psychological evaluations of all of our
But in the original.
teachers every year.
In the original, the original concept paper I wrote.
They're
it was
trained
annual.
annually.
We would have to have annual.
They have drug tests randomly, and I would think you would have an annual psychological evaluation. Although
Sure.
it doesn't say annual. I would
But we
like
could
to-
require that.
You could require that as part of the program.
Or in job description.
Yeah, yes, you'd have the hybrid as part of the job description. You would require that.
And then this is all, even, like, let's just go to option 2. Superintendent, if we went with option 2, we would still have to hire an additional supervisor, correct? All of these options would require the hiring of a supervisor.
That other
Yes.
title,
Yes.
I can't remember what the
Yes.
title is.
Called a district safety specialist.
and that can't be,
Any of our existing personnel?
yeah.
With a
There's
restructured job
specific-
description?
There are specific criteria, so it would be whether or not any individual qualifies based on those descriptors.
I know that one of the questions on the survey was in regards to taxpayer dollars, but it seems to me that if we have option 2, that's something we're looking to
Well,
avoid.
we actually have, I was excited and surprised to see that our residents will put their money where their mouth is when it comes to the safety of our kids.
Right.
That was encouraging. And we're going to have some additional, and that information was important to me, because if we choose an option that isn't as costly, keep in mind that we still have coming forward the cost of hardening our schools.
Yes.
Which is equally important, that a millage increase could be used for. So parking the conversation, unless we all want to go with sheriff's deputies, and then that would need to be immediately discussed. But very quickly, we're going to have, in the next few weeks, right, an assessment of hardening and what that looks like as far as dollars. Is that
Well-
right? I don't want to put,
Right.
Well, the cost of 7.4 million, even if the voters were willing to do that, that would clearly not be in place for the start of this school year.
no, all of that,
Right.
even the millage increases for next year.
Right.
But
Right.
then we have to look at,
So-
I'm sorry.
Oh, so what I'm saying is just option 1 is completely off the table for this year anyway.
Yes.
And
But-
once
but-
you've entered into all these agreements with all these local police agencies, why would you then
Well,
end those?
And again, for me, it cannot be a discussion about what is the cheapest, but what is the best. And I have to tell you that initially I was against using local municipalities because I wanted the central control component to it. And that really is in the event of multiple attacks. But we still have the sheriff available and all of his resources. And I have watched the success of Mount Dora in that community embracing that school and their law enforcement support.
Yeah.
And so I really think that option 2 is our best and most effective being the key word, for the benefit of our kids.
And I think in all efforts also of what was presented earlier, my understanding, I heard that the 7.4 was just a one-time, and then the second year would not be as much. So I think if those that were surveyed had known that it was not a reoccurring 7.4 million each year,
No.
that some of the opposed would have been brought up.
No, it was off the charts at 7.4.
they were like
Based
at
on the.
7.4.
Oh, yeah,
They were
they were
based
well-
at 7.4.
But there were
That-
some that were saying that they opposed, and I think there'd been less opposed if they'd have known it's just a one-time
But
on
it's-
that initial.
But it's still double, if it drops to 3 million, it's still
Yes.
double what it is with option 2.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that the money that we receive is not reoccurring.
That's-
So,
Right.
so that's another key.
That's the scary part.
Well, that's the part where we're going to have to know that in order, but we do know, again, of everything that jumped out of the survey that was done by MIR, the fact that the public will step up if we can demonstrate it's for the benefit and safety of our kids, that was very encouraging to me.
Yeah.
And I don't trust Tallahassee to properly and adequately fund,
Next year.
so
School
we've
safety.
got to do it.
All right, so this was just a total surprise to me. This 1.3 million for deputies is not reoccurring? It's a one-time thing? So next year we gotta figure out $1 million in the budget to keep this initiative going? Is that?
Unless Mr. Ward has heard differently, our understanding is that it is not reoccurring.
Wow. Well, I just figured out our first item for the legislative platform.
Yeah, this was a result of Marjorie Stone. It was part of the $400 million package that they put together at the end of the year.
Yeah.
When we sat down to discuss with the sheriff the option of the resource deputies, I will tell you guys, we talked about the same thing in regards to this is year one cost. So what would year 2 be? We looked at a 5-year projection and what the cost would be over 5 years, and it was $3.3 million per year. So,
So,
So something we need our people's help with.
Which is 1.5 with option 2.
right. Right.
So,
1.5 with room, in my opinion, to negotiate.
right.
Right, so every year, we talked about the other municipalities being able to pick up a school here or there, like we talked to Eustis for some of the other ones and so forth. But it would be, I think it would be advantageous for us to consider now with getting on the ballot coming up in November, because we don't know if it's gonna be funded for next year.
And we
Something
still
to
have
consider.
school hardening.
Yeah,
Right,
we haven't even
that's-
talked
The
about these
hardening
yet.
costs are astronomical.
Right.
And that's
I-
also non-recurring.
Right,
I-
not recurring.
I do want to address just one comment. This is not meant negative, but you speak about fear and that we're reacting from fear. I will tell you that for me personally, I'm reacting to a clear understanding that there are mental health issues that are beyond our control for the immediate, or any immediate cure. I'm addressing recognizing that there's absolute evil there and that people are planning to do harm. And when our schools are basically sitting ducks as no gun zones or not adequately protected, that's really where my heart is. It is not fear. It's just an understanding.
I wasn't specifically speaking about, I wasn't reading you as fear. I was speaking more of what I've noticed when I've heard the public speak, if that makes sense.
That part I agree with.
But in relations to Spring Creek, I understand exactly what he's talking about, response time for someone to get there. And, but I think by having someone there already helps. But there again, if it's going to take 10 to 25 minutes, that's a long period of time for the
Right.
other backup to get there to you. So I worry about Spring Creek, also Sawgrass Bay, as far out as it is. How many is available?
Groveland, Gray Middle.
Pine
That-
Ridge.
Pine Ridge.
Pine Ridge.
Groveland should be
Pine
fine.
Ridge
They've
as
got
well.
PD everywhere.
No, but it took 20 5 years ago, the sheriff did a active shooter training for me, for my benefit.
25 years ago? 5 years?
5 years ago.
Okay.
It took 25 minutes for them to get to Groveland.
That's weird.
I forgot what I was gonna say. I went like 3 different places in my mind. We need to talk about hardening measures as well in regards to what we would like to see done. I think that'd be part of what we would talk about funds to be used for. Because I don't think that anybody would be opposed to hearing, and in the daylight, I want everybody to know that our schools are self-locking, that we have reinforced doors, that we have ways to barricade them, that we have windows that are shatterproof, gunproof, all of those things. Let them be known. Like we talk about letting people know that our schools are not sitting ducks anymore, that we have resource officers and guns in every school. So why don't we also tell them we have all these security measures in place too? So.
Well, and I don't know, because you're absolutely spot on, because I've read some of the recommendations from the public, and some of them are already in place, we just don't speak about it.
Right, right,
And,
right.
and so.
Maybe y'all should
so-
put cameras at every school.
Right.
Yeah, like there should be
Right.
cameras.
Right.
That's,
Right.
or the way the single entry.
That's
I mean,
right.
those are things that we're already doing that, I guess I've just spoken about it. But we normally, that those have been kept in the shape. And that's why, in general terms, when I tell folks that our school campuses, I'll tell you, are safer than anywhere in the state of Florida, I say that with absolute confidence. And that's why I think you saw, again, not the survey, that 72% of the teachers felt safe, because every day they walk through those doors, so they know it. And so I don't know how much, my concern is that all of the data shows that these attackers are planning 6 months to a year. And if they're watching this meeting, how much do we want to share with them?
Right.
That is my concern.
Right.
And for those that are not enlightened and can speak about, then I've sort of just discounted when they say we need more cameras or we need singles, you know what I mean? Just like, okay, we have that, check.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Okay. So Superintendent, what are you looking for? Are we good with this discussion?
I believe so. I have a few things to add. In addition to, I know you've mentioned the hardening plan. Mr. Carr has a committee that's working on a hardening plan. Well, he will bring that to you so that you can see what the recommendations are. That plan does have to go to the state. Remember that there are some one-time dollars. We have no idea exactly how much dollars are attached to that. We've not been told, but we are told that we will submit a plan to the state that must be approved by the local sheriff in collaboration with them, and they have been working alongside Mr. Carr in the development of that plan, so he'll continue to complete that and get it to you. And at the same time, Dr. Landry is working on the mental health plan, which will also be coming to you when that has been completed as well. And we have a little bit of time as they're continuing to work on that. I've been working along with the sheriff and his team to organize our active shooter training. That was one of the things that we heard from students, that students wanted training, as well as the requirement in legislation that all school-based employees complete an active shooter training. There's two components to that. One is we've already sent out to all employees the requirement that they complete an online active shooter course. It is the IS 0907 is the FEMA online course that is required. It generates a certificate upon completion. So they are registering for that through True North Logic. They're completing that course and then uploading their certificate so that we can keep a record of every employee who has completed that training. But in addition to that, they all wanted the active shooter training scenario that we all went through. Every school administrator is signed up for 1 of 4 days training that's coming up the week after school gets out, which will be next week, and then the following week they had days to choose from. So every school-based administrator, did I say that or did I say employee? Every school-based administrator is signed up and required to complete that training. We verify that all of them are signed up, so they will have completed their training. And then we'll be working with the sheriff's office to complete our emergency plans. And as you know, we need to make some significant changes to what we're requiring our students to do now that we have learned about the option-based approach. So we'll be looking at adopting that plan after all of our administrators have completed that so that they understand those options. And I think we saw them at play last Friday. As I read the articles, we saw a school where there was an option-based approach where kids were told to run, and you heard the kids talking about, we jumped the fence, we were told to run. And so we saw some of that in play as all of that unfolded, and that those those kids were trained, and so we need to ensure that our students are trained as well. And I believe that was all, yeah. So those are things still in play, and so we'll get the training completed in the fall as well.
Board members, any other discussion?
When would the children, because I know, I believe you were modifying sort of we went through a 4-hour active shooter training, and when would the children go through?
So we've talked about in the fall, first of all, having all administrators going through it, then all of the school-based employees going through that training. It is not required that school-based employees do the active scenario, although we will highly encourage it. We're going to offer some voluntary sessions this summer for teachers and staff who want to go through that. And then we'll offer some school-based trainings in the fall as well, as long as they've completed the required portion, which is that online piece. Then they will have met the state requirement, but we're going to offer those trainings. So hopefully during pre-planning and into the early part of the school year, all employees who want that additional training will have that. We've talked about then rolling it out to students. Our plan was to have all of the administrators and teachers go through it first, so that then they could help determine what was in the best interest of their students in terms of the training piece. But Lieutenant McDuffie says that he has the staff to be able to roll it out at every one of our schools, elementary, middle, and high, with differing versions based on age appropriateness of students. And so, of course, that's going to take a while, starting with our high schools first. Will be our first priority. We'll accomplish that in the fall with this support, moving from campus to campus to provide that opportunity for all students who would like to go through that training. So it's be a massive undertaking, but we have great support from Lieutenant McDuffie and his SWAT team to roll that out.
I think before they can train students too, we need to update our current practices for how we do.
We need to bring
those
that back,
sessions.
sure.
And we have to give a response to Tallahassee about the Guardian program by June 1st?
July 1st.
Oh, July 1st.
There were some other dates in there. One of the things that seems to stick out for me, and I don't remember the specifics on it, was there something in legislation about communication, electronic communication, or apps or something, or I feel like there was something buried in that 100 and some odd pages about some sort of communication app.
You mean like an active?
I feel like there was something, some sort of, I don't know. I gotta look through the bill again, but I feel like there was something in there that
Yeah,
makes me think there was.
But we have Direct Connect now.
Oh, the state's developing an app. Okay. All right. That's it, maybe.
Anything else, board members?
I just wanted to, I'm not exactly sure how we're ending this, but I wanted
We're
to
not
say.
taking a consensus.
No, exactly. But if, as we move through with a next discussion, that an option of the hybrid option 2 with a guardian excluding teachers, that as part of something we would look at, I'd like to have the opportunity to discuss that.
So I believe our next step is, at some point, I need to bring you a recommendation.
Right.
So our next meeting, I will be planning to do so that we can then, if we decide that we're going to go with any modification of the Guardian program, it still have to be voluntary, so we would have to go through an application process. So even if we say we're limiting it to school-based administrators or only, they'd still have to apply.
But in the true reality of developing this and implementing it, that we can do the deputies or the police officers, which is the number one priority. We saw that based on the data. We can do that immediately. The Guardian, even in best case, is probably the middle to the end of the year, because the program hasn't even been implemented yet by the sheriff. So there's a lot of things to work out, but it would keep it in play, that we would have that opportunity when it's appropriate.
Yeah. Closing comments from you?
Oh, ma'am.
All right.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, board members. We are on the quote that was brought forward, item 3.01. Do you want Mr. Carr to come forward, or superintendent?
So you had asked that Mr. Carr come back with some information in regards to the $750,000 blanket PO and what that would actually be, and what would actually be purchased within that $750,000. I think he's always hiding in the back. So he has done that. Thank you for doing it so quickly, and he has that information for you. So he's here to answer any questions that you have, and I think you have that in front of you as well. We'll let Mr. Carr come up and address that this time.
Well, basically what is submitted before you is what the superintendent has eloquently put, as far as just approving the $750,000, which we wanted to be sure, be sure. So we wanted to be totally open and transparent as to where the money is going. As you know, that was part of that $750,000 was basically approval of a catalog to purchase items off of a piggyback, as so stated there. So what's included in that thus far with the recommended purchase that we bring to you is milk coolers. That's pretty much it.
How many are we buying?
I think it was 22. I don't have the exact number. Sandy, say again, please, sir.
It's 29.
29. Thank you.
And I appreciate this. But what I think I would like to see in the future is, rather than us, if we're going to piggyback another county, I don't have a problem with that, but maybe of something of this nature here, rather than us like giving an open checkbook for $750,000 for them to be able to go purchase anything that they feel necessary. And because of the one issue that I told you about, that there's an overpopulated amount of purchase already that has no home.
Yes.
And just because we have the opportunity to spend that money, we spend it, and I have a problem with that. But I like this idea here. If rather than us approve $750,000 and say, okay, you got an open checkbook, okay, we're going to piggyback off of this bid here to purchase these items here, I would feel more confident in being responsible for the money than just saying you have an open checkbook. But I mean, that's my.
Yes, sir.
And that's exactly what, that this being brought forward, for me personally, had it been to approve $57,661.23, and since this is all that we're buying,
Yes, sir.
would make a whole lot more sense than us approving $750,000 and lose track of what's being spent.
What's happening to the rest of the money?
Well, it's a not to exceed. It's a catalog. Basically, it was a piggyback that we.
But why didn't we make it not to exceed 60,000? Why do we make it not to exceed 750?
Okay, well, this is a single item. We're going to be purchasing additional items that I will bring forth to you.
Oh, okay.
That's what I would like to see.
That-
Me
that-
personally,
that's-
I'd rather see it in these lots of what we're buying,
Right.
rather than here's this umbrella.
Does that make it
The
difficult
way
to
I'm
figure that?
proceeding, if I may, the way I'm proceeding with the $750,000 is that's basically not an open checkbook. It's just basically an allocation for an expense for us to bring towards you, not to exceed that number. So we are not taking liberty to spend money unless we have your approval within that $750,000. So it's kind of like a co-signature, and you have to sign off on it, or we don't worry.
But that's only because we complained, right? I mean, if we had just let the 750 pass, it was just an open checkbook, right?
Yes.
Business the way it was done in the past, but that's not true for the 750.
No.
How we got to the 750, that might have been the case or was the case. When y'all approved the 750, we had this contingency applied, and I'm acting on that contingency.
Okay.
And what I'm thinking, and maybe Mr. Carter can help us, is that they do their budget, and so this is what I have budgeted for this item, so we need $750,000 for the budget that we planned. It's just, we don't generally sometimes see that budget, so this is allowing us to see that budget, but that's where the $750,000 came from. It's not they just said, let's just ask for $750,000,
Well,
right? Like, we budgeted out, this is
well,
what we,
is
and
it
we want
that?
to see what we use it as.
Is it that, or is it that $750,000 was left in their budget, and therefore they're going to spend up to that amount? Because I used to do that all the time at Georgia Tech. Like, seriously.
Well, like I said, this
In the chemistry
750
department, at the end of the year, you'd have so much left in your budget, and we would just spend stuff. We would buy stuff, and
Well,
that's a
at the
typical
direction of the
governmental
board,
budgetary
that's not the
thing.
intent, and nor that is what we're doing with the approval of this 750. Like I said, all line items will be brought towards you as Mr. Gamble and Mr. Mathias have indicated.
But understand, food service is federally funded and reimbursed, so they are responsible if they cannot carry X amount of dollars over from year to year. They have to expend it, and I understand that fully. But I think that, and the reason I've questioned this is because of what I've seen happen at some of the high schools and things that have been done that we as a board were not privy to, and some changes that's happened and monies that's been spent. So the question came up, and the comment I think that came up here recently was about that in this coming year, as they present their budget, if they're in their capital funding, they're saying, okay, we're going to be spending this much money in capital funding for this project here, and it's going to do this, do this, do this. Then I would like to understand what that capital funding is being used for, rather than just saying, we're going to spend $2 million for capital funding. And, because when we go to say in our budget that we're going to spend so much money for new buildings, we kind of outline what those buildings are going to be. And so I think we should hold them accountable as well.
Thank you, Mr. Carr.
But thank you for this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Carr. This gives everybody a little bit more peace of mind, yes. Okay, we are on revisions of the Code of Conduct. I know that Sabrina Delabanks is in here, and we have asked, hold on one second, I've been asked for a 5-minute recess, so we're gonna go into a 5-minute recess. my microphone's on. Chad, I said 1 minute. 2 minutes. You better hurry. You got like 47 seconds, Mark.
The quick one question.
No, I'm just kidding. Do you have somebody that's done the research on it?
Yeah, I have another research person on it.
We're waiting on Dr. Burns. We'll start as soon as she gets back.
But can I ask this then before, because it's not really germane to what we're going to be talking about, but with the Neola, are we following?
Go ahead.
Oh, we have started.
No,
Are
we
we?
haven't started yet.
Oh.
I was waiting on Dr. Burns. Can we,
Okay.
let's just start now. Watch. The meeting is back in session. Mr.
Just for
Thies,
clarification, going through this and these numerical numbers that are the policy, how does that play with the Neola thing that we're doing as an overall? Thank you. That was a good question.
Yeah, you can go ahead, because I asked the same question, right?
So the policies for today are our current policies that we're looking at revising for the 18-19 school year. Next year, when we transition as a district into Neola, there will be some changes to these policies. Probably the numbers will probably change because then we are in Neola's numbering system. But these are our current policies that we are revising for the start of the 18-19 school year.
And we won't have Neola before the 18,
No,
19?
there was no way in regards to the timing of this to get all hers done. She's been meeting with Neola. So a lot of the language revisions that you see is theirs. It's just not in the template with their numbering system. So with the policies themselves, you won't see a lot of revisions. When
Just
it
the
goes-
number.
It's just the numbering and the template and the
So
uniformity of the
this has
policy.
been coordinated so that it's an easy,
Yes.
because
Yes.
I thought
There's no
I thought we
crosswalk.
were going to be
There's no
done in 30 days on Neola. No?
No, each
It's not?
department,
Okay.
yeah, she has many, many policies, and she's met with them. I don't know how many times y'all have actually sat down side by side and gone through a lot of their policies. She just doesn't, no way she can have them all ready and get the code of conduct to you and get the code of conduct ready for 18-19.
We needed a couple policies revised to be able to have it align with the changes to the code of conduct. And we heard what you said when you said you wanted an entire section of Neola revisions done at the same time instead of pieces and parts. And Mrs. Dillon Banks, her section is students, so it's a very large section. So it covers HR, there's all these other, it covers information services, thinking about like social media use. So she has a lot of other people that she has to coordinate with. So we were not bringing back her Neola pieces right now, but she did use the language to help coordinate these policies. So her changes with these will be easy once we get to that section. So she's working on it, but we are not bringing you back Neola revisions today.
Thank you.
And we're not bringing back anything that's not currently in policy and putting it in here with the expectation that it will be policy either. Does that make sense?
Can you say that again?
I thought we did. I thought she said she did do
Say
that.
that again.
Right, so I know there's some things that we're like policies that where they're changing or adding to, but we haven't included any of that in here that hasn't been voted on per policy yet.
Some of the language in the expulsion policy.
That's statute driven.
That has been crosswalked with some of the Neola templates. So a lot of it is statute driven in there. Yes, to answer that question. I think I answered it. Okay. So each year, we bring the code of conduct to you for revision purposes, for you to provide input and also approval of the next year's policy. But before we could do that, as we just discussed, in order to move forward to the Code of Student Conduct, there were several policies that we had to look at, revise, in order to create the Code of Conduct. That's where our policies come from, so we had to relook at several policies before moving forward. I provided you all the packet of the items that were in board docs, and I also gave you an outline so you'll be able to follow along in the presentation, so you have that in your packet. Again, these policies connect. The goal was to look at the expulsions policy. We had some conversations throughout the year about some of the items in that policy, but if, as I present, there's language in other policies that we had to look at because it will impact the expulsion policy. This is just the rationale and the process and the summary of changes, what I'll be talking about, how it all started, and what the goal is, and to where we will end up. So that slide is just a summary of what has happened and what will happen shortly after today's meeting. I will ask you to look at your outline where we talk about the changes to the policies. I would like to start with 5.30. You will look behind tab 4. It is the student control policy. Very little change to that policy other than some language had to be removed and added to the proposed 5.34 policy. So it's very little change to student control in there. So you want to take a look at that, that language there, the student control. The next policy, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I've already got a question.
No problem.
Okay, so this policy about obeying student district rules while being transported to or from school at public expense, would field trips not apply to that even though it's not public expense? So if the students have all paid money for the bus, we'd want the district rules to apply too, or is that covered somewhere else?
Field trips?
Yeah.
It's on the very last line of that. Are you talking about the first paragraph in green?
I think his point is that the kids often pay for field trips, so that's not public expense. Like if they all charter a bus,
Okay.
then that bus is privately chartered.
So are we wanting
No.
to add language that,
I think your language covers it, because when they're on the bus, even though they've paid for it at their own expense, it's still a field trip.
right, and it's still under our scope, so
Yeah.
if there's misconduct,
Why is that
we
even
want to
there,
address.
public expense? What difference does it make? Could you just strike that?
I do believe that's statute language. I'd have to go back and double check that just to make sure, but I believe that's statute language.
Because if you Uber to school, you're being transported. That's not a public expense, and so therefore, why would the district rules apply to you in this vehicle?
The district would, the
Right.
rules wouldn't apply to you in an Uber.
So that's
right,
for the public expense.
Right.
Okay, because then we're the ones transporting them.
putting them, and we're responsible for them.
So if you're feeling naughty,
You should Uber. Don't start that. We don't want to get that out there. Any other question about that particular one? Okay. And we move forward to 4B, which is our zero tolerance policy and crime and victimization. Again, very little change in that one. If you look on page 2 of 3, a lot of this language is in reference to the changes, the proposed changes, to 5.34, as well as the change to the Florida statute 1006.07 with the changes from Senate Bill 7026. So that's where that language comes in that you see in paragraphs 1 and 2. And now we're going to look at 5.34. We, again, as I said earlier, we were challenged to take a good look, a deep look at our current expulsion policy. 4C, the expulsion policy. I've also put 2 copies in there. I put one in with track changes for 4C and one without for 4D, just to help you for reading purposes, because there are a lot of strike-throughs, but you can look at whatever copy that works best for you. 4C is with track changes, 4D is without track changes. So again, at the beginning of the year, we were asked to take a look at our current policy to make sure it was current, what needed to be revised, what needed to be changed, and in conjunction with conversations with the attorney, as well as looking at trends in other districts, and also the paperwork that was coming in through our office from students who were transferring in. I began to take a close look at our current practices, and that's where you'll see a lot of the changes to our policy. A lot of its definitions that were added and clarified to the policy, as well as the title. I should have started there, right? So the title had a change. And some of our current practices as far as bringing students before you for board action. We've been bringing a lot of students before you for board action in the expulsion process. So we really need to look at how we were handling removal of students for disciplinary reasons. So that's really where you'll see a lot of the changes to the policy. Our process may change a little, but our services to students will hopefully increase in the availability to those students. Because when we take them through expulsion proceedings, we may not be giving them all of the services available to them as well as instead of doing a disciplinary removal. So again, very little would change with that other than things coming before you for board action, which is consent agenda items that you normally would vote on.
Wait, I'm confused. Are we talking about, when you say what's coming before us, are you talking about this policy, or are you talking about the kids that come before
I'm
us?
talking about the students that come before you for board action on a
Yeah.
consent agenda when they're removed. That's an
Oh,
agenda item.
that item.
Those, yes, ma'am, that's board action. You're actually taking action on
Yes.
that student.
Okay.
So instead of taking every student through an expulsion proceedings, that's where we've outlined which students shall go through expulsion proceedings and which students will be removed for disciplinary placement. Meaning, it's what we already currently do, but the process we were doing them was a little different. We were bringing everyone before you for expulsion proceedings instead of just removals for disciplinary reason.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
And if you look on your outline at the bottom, I've kind of provided a summary of that for you. On
Bottom of
behind tab 2. 2. There's your outline on tab 2. I thought I'd tab it for you. And that's a summary of what I just explained there for what those changes are. Okay. Any questions so far?
No, this
I'll
makes
keep
sense.
moving. Okay.
Okay, I didn't know. I thought we were speaking about the students that actually sit before us and have the leniency hearings.
Okay. So again, on the slide, a summary of the changes for 5.34 are policy, definitions, rephrasing and or reorganizing. Our processes will be clarified as well as aligned to our policy and our practice. And that slide just represents a summary of what I just said. There's a suspension, then the students would either be removed through an alternative discipline placement or expulsion. And in the policy, it defines which students would be eligible for alternative discipline placement and which students would be eligible for expulsion. And those students for the expulsions proceedings are the ones that are statutorily required to be removed through expulsion proceedings. And I'm looking at Mr. Johnson in case I'm misspeaking at any point.
So I'm gonna go ahead and ask you.
Sure.
Why did we decide to stick with, because we had talked about how many counties have gone down to 5 days of suspension or even 3 days of maximum? Why did we decide to stay at 10? Not to exceed 10 days of suspension?
Help me with that.
Because remember, like when we met,
Mhm.
we talked about Flagler County, for example. They went down to a maximum. The board chose that there would be a maximum of 5 days. I think it was 5. But, and
They
in
would
some
cap
cases, 3.
suspensions.
They capped suspensions
Just
at
at
5
5
days, and
days.
in some cases, 3. I'm not, maybe it was 3 for elementary. And they did that too, basically because they were having so many out of school. The kids were out of school for 2 weeks and missing all this school, and then it's really hard to get back on track. And so it actually increased their graduation rates by like 10% over time. They tracked it over time.
Well, again, that would be a conversation that
I think we discussed that a little bit. One of the things that happens here and often in most places is, I always want to give, the opportunity for principals to have some ability to talk to parents, and so we go up to 10, and then oftentimes it's adjudicated down. When they come in for their first meeting, they'll have some leeway to say, well, I'm willing to go to 5, or I'm willing to go to 3, but when you start at 5, it often doesn't allow them some flexibility to adjudicate it down really far. And so I think we've got to really think about the idea that we don't have the opportunity to see every situation, and some require some time out. And so I think when you go to only having 5, sometimes when we have a serious case, it takes up to a week or so to see what's happening with the law enforcement, and we need the opportunity for time, right? So I think it really is a case-by-case basis, and for me, it allowed people some flexibility. We did change the language up to 10, right? So it didn't have to be 10 for some things.
Right, because it seems like most things that come to us is 10. And maybe that's just because once it gets to us, it's 10.
Right, and there's typically law enforcement involved, and so.
In most cases,
Go
if I
ahead,
may,
Karen.
in most cases that come before you, those are the most serious violations. We normally do not bring cases before you that are minor offenses, reoccurring or repeating minor offenses. The ones you all see are the major offenses, and most are the zero tolerance ones that you see. So those are the ones with 10 days, and those are your more serious ones. I think the one we talked about was the drug use possession being up to 10 days. And that language. And that
I remember
language.
that particular case. But there was other ones. We talked about it sort of in general.
In general, we did discuss, but again, it's kind of what Dr. Weiskopf is saying, if everything at 5 days, some things takes more days to have your conferences, as well as notifications to parents, and if there's a removal on the other end of that, to get notices out to the district. With 5 days on a suspension, we may not be able to do that in 5 days. But there are certain offenses levels that principals do not have to suspend up to 10 days. And that is, again, where that principal discretion comes in that Dr. Weiskopf was just speaking about.
How are we doing, like, across the district? I'll take Leesburg. Is there way more, like 10-day suspensions in Leesburg versus South Lake?
I would have to specifically look at that data. And again, in most cases, 10-day suspensions are used for your moderate to major offenses. Level 1s are minor offenses. We've already capped those in the code of conduct, as they cannot be suspended more than 5 days. So that's already been in place. So if it's a level 1, which is a minor offense,
Those
5
are
days
really
is-
minor, though.
are
Some of
the
those are
minor
gum
offenses.
chewing.
Minor offenses. We took gum chewing out of the code of conduct.
Did you? Good.
Years ago as an offense.
You
Yes,
forgot
ma'am.
your ID.
That's wrong.
That's in there.
That is in there.
There are, some of them are
That
really
is in
minor.
there.
Some of
That
the
is in
level
there.
ones are really minor.
But as we talked about, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, we gave guidance to principals that said on that first offense, that should be a warning or a Wednesday school. If it's reoccurring, then it becomes another level offense, which is a level 2 defiance of authority. But you did ask for that guidance to be sent out to principals last year, and I did do that. So, again, level 1s are your minor offenses that you may have to remove a student for, but 10 days, you should not be removing a student for 10 days for a minor offense. And that's when we put that cap in last year in policy. We did do that.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions about policy before I move into the code of student conduct? So if you look behind tab 5, that is the revisions sheet, and Mr. Gamble's already smiling at me. I think there's about 18 pages here, and it's all of the changes, the proposed changes for next year. And it's just this slide shows a summary of the proposed changes. We did some realignment and appearance changes. We did some clarification of language. We also had to make some adjustments, again, due to legislation, some new information, We found some grammatical errors, thanks to our wonderful attorney, who is an English teacher, who came through and caught some of our, Elizabeth. She caught a lot of our little grammatical boo-boos there, so we had to make some of those changes, as well as some names and department changes, so,
I just got a question,
absolutely.
and I've already talked with them about that, that's why she said I was smiling. Under number 1, under daily conduct code, on the first paragraph,
Is it the obedient thing?
yes, be respectful and obedient is restricted, but it says at all times and obedient unless asked to do wrong.
Well, yeah, if somebody asks you to do something wrong, you should be disobedient, right?
I had to read it
What?
the whole time.
Wait,
I did too.
why did we write that?
Yes, and I said, I promise we did not make that up. That is actually in the statute.
Oh.
That is actually statute language.
So I've asked if that can be reworded, and I've been kind of told
It's in statute.
it's in the statute, but can it be reworded?
But a lot of times, so if an adult, and obviously we don't ever, we would like to believe that nobody would do this, but if an adult asks a child to do something wrong, this gives them, not that they would even know about the code of conduct and have read it, but it would give them the opportunity to say no if you felt uncomfortable. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it just gives them,
Unless asked to do.
It's in the statute.
it's in the statute.
Right?
Oh, so you're saying a kid can say, no, I'm
That's
not
exactly
gonna
right.
kick the other
That's
kid because you
exactly
told me
right.
to kick him.
That's exactly right.
Do we need a footnote on this one to explain what that
Right.
means?
That's all that
I'll
means.
confess, it sounds like I'm here defending it, but I had to read it about 4 or 5 times before I understood what it said.
So,
That's awesome.
and we did too. And we, like, am I reading this incorrectly? No, it does say that.
That's what it's for,
Okay,
though.
so
So
then
that
the
kid
kid
has
can
the way to say,
say,
no,
no,
that's
I
not
don't."
right. I shouldn't be asked to do that.
That's wrong, I can be disobedient.
Because the law says it.
Be disobedient
So
against my
if-
teacher
if-
who's telling me
if
to do
a
something I shouldn't.
Teacher asks a student to do a task that they know is going to prevent them from doing what they're supposed to be doing, like
That's
going
right.
to the next class.
Right.
They could say no.
That's right.
Lining up after just 15 minutes of recess, right? The law says 20. So,
There you go.
I know some kids that are going to leverage that.
And that was hard, but again, like I said, that's, we're trying to align to statute. And when we saw that, we all, I'm like, whoa, but I agree. I had the same reaction. But that's what the law
It is
says.
odd.
Misleading.
And again, that slide is also just to show you, if you wanted to see the realignment, that's tab 6, in case you just wanted to look at realignment and see how we made some changes for clarification and readability purposes. But I want to go to the revisions highlights of all of the 18 pages. Just again, like I said, I just kind of did a summary of the changes, but these are the ones that I want to bring your particular attention to. If you look on page 6 of the revision sheet, the language in green there is statute language again, where we actually define what a bus stop is. That was by request of several administrators on the committee. We also consulted with Mr. Fender, and he thought that would be great language to have as well. We referenced the statute, but we did not actually lay out the language. So this item is just actually laying out the language that defines what a bus stop is. Next item on page 7 of the revisions sheet is also statute language that addresses dress code and the ability to allow students to have headgear and sunglasses during outside activities or classes that are held outside. Again, it's just language that's in the statute that we thought we should bring to your attention that does give students the ability to have that, and I'm sure it's for protective factors.
Did
as
you
well.
add the sunscreen law to this too?
That's my question.
You had the same question?
Yeah.
I don't know if Dr. Landry added the sunscreen piece in here. I'd
Because
have to
it is a
check.
new law.
But I'd have to go back and check. I don't recall seeing that.
Right?
Was chapstick part of that too?
Chaps?
I think chapstick might have been in the same sunscreen thing.
Oh.
Yeah, because
Well, there's also the sunscreen that is
Let me
like
make
on
that
in a
That's right.
stick.
That's right.
Okay. I'll double check that. And if it's so, we'll definitely get that in before we bring it for tentative approval. So I'll definitely get with her on the sunscreen piece. And the next item is page 8, and I apologize if I say this word incorrectly, pediculosis.
Oh, can I ask, I was gonna ask why we still, do we still have the BYOD as a functioning, is it still functioning?
Yeah, as far as I know, that is still an option available to schools, so we leave it in for those participating schools to be covered.
Okay.
And I'm looking at Dr. Wheeler just to make sure, okay.
So we still are using it? Okay.
So again, page 8, pediculosis, we have had this conversation, I think, for several years. And Dr. Landry did add some language this year to address the procedures and to clarify how we would address students that
Is it
have these
statute?
issues.
Is it statute mandated now? I know I saw the American Pediatric Association and so forth, but we have to allow them to come to school with NITS per statute or no? I didn't see a statute referenced.
There is no statute reference, no. This was just some additional language added for procedural purposes and guidance. And like I said, I know this conversation has happened for several years, and to take a look at how we're addressing those individual students. So this was the proposed language that she has provided for.
I'm okay with it, especially knowing the whole attendance issues that we have, but it would be very interesting to see next year whenever we look at this code of conduct again, if we saw an increased lice.
Could probably get that from the health department.
Yeah, I would like for us to consider that next year when we consider doing, I'm fine with the change and looking at it this year, but if we also see an increased if this now is gonna impact and have more kids out of school because
Right.
there is now a population or a problem with lice, then I think we should address that and go back to the way it was, so.
And it's,
Make a note of that.
it's like live lice they can
Right.
still send the kids home for.
Yes.
Yes.
So if they're jumping off of them.
Right,
But no nits.
but they can come to school with nits, but at any time, those nits can become live lice. And I
That's the
know
thing.
currently, we have one check a week, and that's if it gets checked. And so I'm not, like, at this point in time, I'm picturing teachers having to put sunscreen on kids, and now we have to check for lice every day. Do you know what I'm saying?
That's
So
right.
if I check on Friday and the kid just has nits, but I don't check again till the next Friday, they could have had live lice in their head Monday through Thursday, and now 7 kids have live lice, and all 7 go home.
Do we
as
still do
opposed to the
nit
one.
checks? Do all the teachers still do nit checks?
Just once a week.
Once a week is all I know of, and I don't even know that how frequently it even happens.
I don't think that's in elementary schools.
They don't
So
have
like
to
I
do
said,
where if there's
I
a
get it.
case
Like,
of-
I'm not saying, I promise you guys, I'm not saying, but what I don't want to see happen is now we have
Right.
7 to 10 kids out for
No, I
live
think
lice.
I think it's a good.
So it'd be nice
Just
if we could
something we
have
just
some
need to
research to
monitor.
bring back
We just
on
need to
that.
monitor throughout the
Yes.
year.
Yes,
So
that'd be
is
awesome.
is it a new opinion from the American
is.
Academy of Pediatrics? It's new. It's a new
Like
opinion.
last year, the year before, right?
Listen, we've done it once, I will tell you. We had lice in our house one time with Jensen, with hair down to here.
Oh, it's a
It was a
nightmare.
nightmare. And so the possibility that we could spread it even more rampantly than that one time when I thought I was gonna go crazy.
Talk about it's making my head itch.
I know, right?
Well, that's what I was
It
waiting
happens
to see
every
how many
time.
people were gonna swerve, but I didn't see that.
She's got 'em.
Yeah, if I could shave her head, I would have. I was pregnant at the time, so I couldn't even use the chemicals in my hair, so I'm just telling you guys, it was a nightmare. And I just don't want to see that perpetuated because of, we want kids in school. I want kids in school too, but I don't want to create a problem.
I know these people are doctors, but I mean, are doctors always right?
Right.
I don't
This
know.
is coming from a man who's got 5 kids, so if one of his kids get it, his whole family's out.
I've got a vested interest in
He's
this.
wiping out of school.
That's exactly right. They're taking down
That's a
Cypress
lot of
Ridge
different
Elementary.
And this is exactly why I'm here to workshop all of this.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we have time
Yes,
to
ma'am.
decide if this is something that,
I just feel the repercussions are going to happen when teachers are doing that check and they send the kid to the office with the nits, no live lice, and the office says, no, they're supposed to stay in your classroom today, and they're going to go, what did that school board do? Right?
Most of the time, I know in some elementary schools, it's the teacher assistants
Right,
that are
right, right.
doing the check.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Not
Yes, it
not
is.
the teachers themselves, so.
So that's the TAs out there.
If they can keep the shampoo in the nurse's station.
But yeah, but the whole house has to be, oh my God.
This is going to be one of the first time this kid, that it comes to the surprise that this kid stays in school with eggs that could hatch at any given moment.
Right, that was my concern.
Then
I'm sorry, I try not to.
here we are.
I think it's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
It's scary. And I'm telling, okay, so let me give you the opposite side of that, because I know, Dr. Burns, you spoke about this last year pretty passionately. And we do see, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if Dr. Landry's here, but, so generally, it's the same students, because it is hard to get rid of. So potentially, you have 1 or 2 students that would be out of school for a
Like
long
over and over and over
time.
again.
So I think what we're trying to do here is let those kids be in school, because live eggs can't jump anywhere, but I also have huge concerns that we're gonna perpetuate a lice problem. So I get it, we want those kids in school, and that they have a hard time getting rid of it, and we looked at our truancy, I'm sure they're marked as an early warning indicator for
Oh, I'm sure
absence.
they are.
But I don't know where the balance,
I think checking, does the health department collect those stats still?
I'm not
We
sure.
used to get all of our
I'm not sure
meds
about
from the health
that, but I
department.
will
'cause they would give
find
us
that
free
part out and
meds.
get that answer back to you all.
And
because I'm not sure
this
about that
change,
part.
this change is in a response to the discussion that came up last year.
Last year.
I'm
Well,
saying
that's what I thought.
we're
That's why I
changing-
asked if it was
We're changing
statute.
it because of a conversation that you all had last year.
But
so
I think it was Dr.
I need to
Burns.
understand.
It
I
was.
was Dr. Burns. It
I
wasn't, it
remember.
wasn't a collective agreement, so that's why it's nice to have the
I
conversation.
did not ask.
I know you didn't. I
You
know.
walk into CVS or Walgreens or Publix and buy the shampoo, right? So health department is not necessarily aware of all the.
Right.
So I just don't know that that's a
Well,
valid
that's what I was,
process,
that's what I was
just
asking, because like, I know when, I had a kid who
Do
got some
schools keep
salmonella,
stats?
and we were turned in by my mother-in-law, the pediatrician.
I mean, again, if it's something we wanted to capture the trends, we would just have to definitely ask our school personnel to document that, so that when we do come back in a year, you have some data, if that is what, we need to do in order to make a sound decision.
Can they be treated and sent back to class or not?
No.
Can we
It's like a
treat-
shampoo.
You
I
can
mean,
Yeah, could
treat
you do
it.
that?
I don't know if that's what I was thinking, is why would we not help them and just treat them? But the problem is when they go home, that it's on your bed
But
sheets.
you
and
really
there's
are trying to
nothing
keep them in
else.
school and protect other kids.
Then wash their hair and kill the live ones and send them back to class.
Yeah.
But who's gonna do that? Because we don't
But
have
that's-
nurses.
that's
I
medicated.
need to remind you of our allocation process with our nurses.
Yes,
That's
that's
right.
what I just said. We don't have people to do that.
No, but it doesn't take a nurse to wash somebody's hair.
But this is a medicated shampoo. This is not
Yeah,
just
I
your
don't- I don't-
herbal essences.
I don't know.
Yeah,
That's exactly right. It is medicated.
and
It
you
is
have to like leave it
100%
on
medicated.
for like 15 minutes or something.
But it would help that kid, those same perpetuating kids, stay in school. I get what you're saying. I was
Then you're gonna
thinking
have a
through
hair
the.
dryer.
I mean, we've implemented other programs to protect
We have.
or to help kids.
We have.
I would
Because there's no
just share it
guarantee when they
all.
go home that they're being.
I would
taken care of.
imagine that we utilize lice kits, that we send things home with people, that we, I'm sure that we do provide some support. Our social workers, I'm sure, provide some support.
We have a lice kit,
Go get some
and we have a social worker.
You have a lice kit?
Well,
Kit.
there are,
Kit.
no, I said I'm sure
Kit.
people would
Oh.
get lice kits and send it, I think that's available. We have to purchase them, but I think there's some ways we can
But
do
the,
that.
but the social worker could be the person that puts the kit on their hair and then sends it back to
Well, I
class.
wouldn't, I'm not gonna go that, I'm not,
Maybe.
don't put words in my mouth.
No, I'm just,
I'm not committing to that, Mr.
Dr.
Price.
Weisskopf said, our chief
No,
of transportation.
Yeah, exactly. No.
Doctor, put that doctor in front.
Our doctor
No.
of transportation.
I'm not saying that.
MD, right?
I'm saying that you said that we put resources into place for other things, and we have, I'm sure that we utilize all the resources that we have and put those into play, but I understand what you're saying. I just wanted to know the language change, how it came about.
Can I make the suggestion then, that rather than jumping and making the change in monitoring, that this year we keep our language as it is, and we collect stats on the students that are habitually absent because of a lice? Let's see if there's a problem and how big it is.
Okay.
Can we do that? I mean, I know that's putting extra work on somebody in these.
Well, it wasn't me who brought this, it was Dr. Landry, who was pretty passionate about
Was
it,
it
right?
Dr. Landry? I don't remember. I just remember.
I just remember
Talking
there
about
was conversation, last year when we brought the code
Yeah.
and looking for some changes to
Yes.
our policies.
And Dr. Landry would have been here, but she had a family emergency.
Well, then she's not here, so we're not, but I'm just.
So she was planning on being here.
Is her family?
I wish we could move away from this discussion.
Okay, so in order to move forward, yes, so,
Talking about that.
Not be used to treat lice.
Just
So
let
to
her know,
keep-
we don't want, we are
Right.
fearful that we're gonna perpetuate a situation that's gonna have lots of kids missing school because of live lice if we don't monitor every day.
okay,
Thank you.
No.
all right.
I didn't even ask for it, though, if you noticed.
Okay, and the next topic is medical marijuana on page 9 there. again, Dr. Landry wanted to add some additional language to the code because that conversation is out there in school districts throughout the state. So this is her proposed language to address that conversation.
Okay, do we have any kids that are on medical marijuana for epilepsy? Because those would be the ones I'd be concerned about.
To answer that 100%, I cannot answer that. I don't believe so.
I mean, there's
I don't
some
believe so. Not,
few
I don't
very
believe so,
serious reasons
but
to.
I can't say that 100%. I don't want to say that 100%. I haven't
Can we
heard
check?
that, but it doesn't mean it's not
I mean,
happening.
we have made it legal in this state.
So
But it is illegal
And
under federal
education-
law.
yeah, but
And do
under-
we not receive
education
federal
is
funds?
states' rights.
Are there not any federal funds used in our facilities? There absolutely are.
I don't think we're under any problem of, I'd be surprised if they came after us with states' rights on education for our funds. I'm only, like, there are some serious conditions, and he brought up cancer,
right.
you know, I don't, and there are children with leukemia.
I
don't
can
know
see
if
it as
they're.
a general statement, this, but I think that we should have an exception.
That's why,
Case by
that's why
case
it concerns me
consideration.
where it says, not even with a physician's order.
And okay, superintendent.
But, oh, go ahead, sorry, Superintendent.
There is some conflicting language in legislation in regards to this matter, so I'd like for Mr. Johnson and Elizabeth to have time to go back and bring, before we agree on those changes, to get some clarification and bring that one back.
I just put pull. I just put pull by it.
Okay, thank you.
And also, if we would take a look at page 11 in our revisions document. Which is the drug use possession conversation that we had just a few minutes ago, that instead of having a mandatory 10-day suspension on the first offense, it would be up to 10 days of out-of-school suspension for the first offense. So that was the slight change for that particular offense. So it will be up to 10 days, not a mandatory 10.
So pretty much for most, we're making it up to. Is that except for in cases of the statutory ones where they're zero tolerance? I'm barely speaking. In most cases, it's my fault. It looks like we're changing 10-day suspension to up to 10-day. Is
For
that
this-
true?
For this offense. If
But
you're
you had it
speaking
in
for-
several others.
There are several others, but it's not pervasive
Okay.
throughout the code that things are up to 10 days.
Okay.
There are a few things that shall be 10 days, and then a lot of it is principal discretion.
Are the
But the-
shall-be's like
The,
state statute?
the ones that are considered majors
Okay.
are 10 days. Those things that are considered zero tolerance are 10 days. But your level 1s, 2s, and 3s, there's discretion for principals. This was one of the ones that they did not have discretion. They had discretion in other items in that category, but we had this one as must be 10-day suspension. It was a non-negotiable. Where now we're giving them some flexibility depending on the age, situation surrounding the incident.
We heard in a different conversation this morning, the young lady speak about the difference, the way things are being enforced between minorities and,
Can you talk into your mic, Mr. McCombs?
I thought it was.
Oh.
Testing.
Is that better?
Okay, yeah, okay. By giving this up to 10 days, how are we going to make sure that we aren't sort of profiling or, am I making my point, that minority kids aren't being 10 days and
Everybody else
because
is-
it's flexibility, it's 5 days? Should it be as clear-cut as it's 5 days for this offense or 8 days for, no? Okay.
That's what I was asking, like, we can ask her as a board to pull, like demographic statistics if we want, so that we can see, do we have, I don't know, what is our percentage?
But
of-
how often are we going to do that?
That's what I was thinking,
No,
more,
I mean-
When it's
more
really-
for school-based administrators to make sure they're having those conversations about.
But it
what's
may be
happening
the
in their
school-based
lives.
administrator, it's given the upside down, or
It's not unusual for boards to pull that statistical information.
Right.
And so that we know that.
So we actually did do some data pulling. Remember at the very beginning of the year, you and me and Ms. Pearson, we had a conversation where we were doing kind of a report on that, and we did pull some information. So we do often look at it regularly. I think, to your point of, should we have like this offense is 2 days, this offense is 4 days? You have to realize it's a K-12 Code of Student Conduct. And so, and you've seen this, when a third grader brings in something that they happen to have gotten, in this case, I think we're looking at a substance, the drug piece. It looks different, right, than when a 17-year-old brings it and it's just different. And so I don't think you want to mandate, this is 2, this is 4, this is 5, which is why you have to give discretion at the situation, which is why up to 10 is, our younger kids at a first offense, because they saw somebody have it and they thought it'd be cool to show, is a different thing than somebody bringing it to distribute for malicious intent. And so we don't that's why I don't think you want to say 2 days is this or 3 days is
I was
this.
only just reflecting on the comment that was made
Yeah, but
about
we do
who's
have
going to
data
be carrying
that-
guns and not guns and all that business. And the,
Mhm.
and the reality is that I remember back in the days when I was a cop, you gave somebody a break. Now then with cameras and stuff, it's pretty straightforward. If it's who you knew back in the days.
Oh,
And
the good old boy system?
And
Sure.
now it's different, and it should today be different, where it's very specific that if you're white, green, yellow, purple, it's 2 days for this offense, or et cetera. I don't know.
What works, I mean, you've looked at a lot of counties. What seems to be a better policy?
When it comes to the drug piece, there's
Since
a
we're
lot of
looking at-
discretion. There's some discretion. What, our situation, because we are K-12 code, as Dr. Weisskopf just said, we have to build in that flexibility because our policy addresses kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. So a lot of districts that do use a K-12 policy, they do allow that range for the disciplinary offense, whereas we had it 10 days, that was it. And principals just felt like their hands were tied because it was policy and they didn't want to go outside of that. Whereas this gives them the discretion based on the level of the student and the circumstances surrounding that student's situation.
Even though it seems like it's an awful lot of pages, it's almost impossible to draw up a policy like this that fits every circumstance and every situation that arises, and there's got to be some flexibility. And it's inherent in the application of all these policies, both to students and employees and the public, that there's not a disparate impact with one group about the other. And I will assure you that your students and the parents of your students have no shyness about complaining about if they believe that there's a disparate impact both to the school district and to OCR and every other government agency. So I think if you weigh the two of them, obviously you can't be applying it in a discriminatory manner, but unless you have some discretion to be able to apply it to different situations, you kind of tie your hands and can't do anything.
I mean, you know how frustrating the zero tolerance policies are.
Right. But I'd be way okay with it as long as we're monitoring it, because, so that person that does make a complaint, that we're able to defend the fact that we don't do it. You know
And
what I
that would be
mean?
a good
But-
idea to have that monitoring.
Mhm.
So can we then ask for,
Yeah, we do monitor it. I mean, we do pull those reports. We do look at them as a district. So when my cabinet looks at this.
Can you bring them
data, we
before the
look at
board?
attendance data.
can you bring them before the board?
I just wrote it down.
Sometime with the schedule.
I'm just making a note.
Are you asking for that
The only thing I'm
Okay,
saying
that's-
is I would hate at the end of the school year that because an active parent makes that allegation and does a public request, that suddenly we're hit with XYZ school, there's 90% of kids of color were treated completely different than other kids. That's all.
I guess it,
Or boys versus girls, or whatever.
and I hear what you're saying, but on this particular.
I'm good with
thing-
giving them the leeway as
Okay.
long as someone there's some oversight. That's all.
And-
Give them headlights.
Just when everybody was ready to move on.
I've got a question on that page. It looked like you were about to turn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, problem-solving team, and I don't know if this is the best place to interject this, but, because I know we've got various processes we follow for MTSS. I guess it's somewhere in one of those processes, I'd love to see that if the student is recommended to move into Tier 2, that the parents are notified, that they receive some notification of that. Apparently, there's some discrepancies in information that's out there, and I don't think everybody believes that you're supposed to notify a parent at Tier 2.
Yeah, that seems like,
Common sense.
It
Yeah.
does, but then,
it also seems like it would be a violation of their, I don't know if rights is
so,
the right word.
or I guess Ms. Pearson's got a nod there. So it is in there somewhere?
Ms. Pearson, if you want to
Okay,
come up to the
all right, well
microphone,
then, problem solved. Maybe folks just maybe need some new training on that. I don't know.
Just quickly, there is a parent notification letter for any time a student is recommended for Tier 2 or for Tier 3. That should be sent home.
Okay.
It's in the packet.
Is there not meetings?
Yes.
Or-
Not for Tier 2.
Not for Tier 2?
Parent notification is just sent home. The school it's not required that parent has to meet. The parent is allowed to, after receiving the notification, if they want to come in and meet or have any type of parent conference, that is allowed. It is absolutely required, though, for Tier 3 that a parent is present.
Question then, you said the letter is sent home to the parent? How is it sent home?
It could be mail, it could be email, it could be stapled to a report card.
Is it required that the parent signs and returns it?
Yeah, a signature. is
Okay.
required.
Okay.
It's not going to be stapled to the report card anymore.
Progress report,
Good call.
however.
Good call.
Yes.
Wait, how do you what about emails?
Yes, they can
Stapled to
email.
the email.
Like they have to respond back or something?
Yeah, they can print it out and
Okay.
sign it, or just send a response.
Okay.
And then
Okay,
connect
so there
it.
does have to be actual.
Notification for both, parent present for Tier 3.
Thank you. Because I was gonna have to make a note and get back to you on that one. Am I safe to move forward? Okay.
Go to page 12.
We're gonna go to 15 unless there is anything in the interim. A lot of the things in the middle are just, again, the realignment and clarification of items on those.
So not all schools are doing restorative practices at this time?
Not this year. Not
It's
this year.
something that we're sort of rolling out.
Correct. It's what we're gonna roll out slowly to get everyone trained and moving forward.
And zero tolerance, do we have any, you do have statutes over. I hate zero tolerance. We get,
As do I. Okay, I think I'm on page 15. Just wanted to speak to that because I know you probably noticed a lot of strike-through in that section, and it's only because of the reformatting of the weapons section and a couple additions with statute language there. We noticed that the way we had it, everything was in a paragraph, everything was all jumbled up, and then we decided to break it out where it was easier to read for everyone to understand. So that was the change to that section for weapons.
can we quickly go back to page 14?
Absolutely.
The forced suspension thing?
Yes.
You and I had a conversation about this, so.
Yes.
So just for y'all's edification, sometimes we can have a situation where, not gum chewing, but we'll use gum chewing as an example. They can chew gum 4 times and then they're suspended, right? Or what would be they would lose their ID
They
4
forgot their
times.
ID.
Yes,
Okay.
the ID will go with that one.
And then they'll be suspended
Or a dress code.
for dress code. Yeah, these minor
Or-
things. So we talked about it, but I don't know if we ever, did you look at that? Because I know you were gonna look at that problem, that specific, like 3 strikes and you're out type thing.
Correct, so I did have some conversation with the committee as well as reached out to some administrators who were not on the committee to get feedback from the administrators at the school. And that's why you'll notice that where it says students who are referred must have gone through the MTSS process, the problem-solving team process. We need to be looking at those students before we recommend removal for them, which addresses your, so many strikes, you're out. Well, if we're having those types of behavior issues, what are we doing before we recommend you for removal? Unless that last offense is a zero tolerance offense, of course, then that's a non-negotiable. So that's one of the pieces that we put in. So it can't just be boom, 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 you're out the door. We need to do something in the interim before we make a recommendation for removal. So that is a piece that is added. Also, we looked at what type of offense that it needs to be before you can be recommended for that fourth. So what is that fourth suspension? Is it a minor offense, or is it one that's progressively getting toward a major offense? So that's some of the green language that you see. There it said it shall not be a minor offense as outlined. If you look in the middle. Okay, so that's some of the language we add from our conversation, as well as recommending those students to MTSS prior to recommendation for removal.
Right, and we had that, because we had kind of
Yes.
a high number of kids.
For the fourth suspension, correct. And that's why, as a code of conduct committee, we talked about it, and then Dr. Weisskopf requested that I also consult with school-based administrators that were not on the committee. So I did do that as well, and got some feedback from them. And then also spoke with Ms. Pearson and her team, and then it was a collaborative effort to come up with what would this look like for students who have been referred for multiple offenses.
Thank you.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
Sorry, I was supposed to go to that meeting that she keeps referring to.
Yeah, she ditched me.
I did, last minute had a conflict, so.
So that is where that language came
Totally
from.
ditched her. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And as I said, on 15, again, not a lot of change to the actual infraction, other than just kind of realigning how that can be read. And that was from a conversation that we had with a parent who said, I didn't see it, it was embedded. I didn't know that was in there, I just got here. So after that, we just decided to kind of break it out where it'd be visible of what our expectations are.
What's a slingshot?
I want to know what a billy is.
Is that it's supposed to be a slingshot?
No, I think a slingshot is like
I looked it up.
Yeah, we did too. We did too.
It's
It has
used
a-
for mooring, is what it's done to sling, you tie something to it, and you sling it from here to there. And it's got what they call a monkey fist at the end, and it's got a loop in it.
Huh.
I looked it up just now, because I was like.
Do you swing it and you hit the person with the swing? Or is it a
You can-
projectile?
Like David and Goliath thing?
Well,
Yeah, I thought it was kind of like something in the medieval times. So we did,
It's not like
we
that.
looked it up as well.
What's a, billy's?
Like a club? Billy club?
A billy club, that's what I perceive it as.
Oh, well done.
Here, pass that.
Okay.
There's your picture of the phone.
And
Oh,
just as
Yeah,
intrigued
sort
as
of
I
like the David
was.
and Goliath thing.
Yeah.
So, again, those were just the highlights of the 18 pages of the changes. A lot, again, is just reformatting, clarification, statute language changes. The next section here, this slide just shows the new information that is also in the revisions pages. We added some home ed language by request, as well as victimization. We did have it in there, but it was not as clear as the language we added now. It again explains the rights of those students who have been victims of crimes, what we should do for those individuals. And again, that is statute language. Felony reports, it just explains to the parents how we obtain that information before there's a suspension or removal assigned to a student who has an off-campus felony. We thought it was important to kind of add that piece as well. We've already discussed the medical marijuana. Fresh start clause, again, it's just explaining to individuals that we do not carry over discipline to the next school year, meaning if you had 2 suspensions this year, you start at 3 suspensions next school year. That, we just wanted to clarify that with our stakeholders. Again, problem-solving team was a new section, restorative practices, due process, we added that to lead into suspensions. And then we added the piece about due process for suspensions for those off-campus felony placements. We had that language there, we removed it. It was a request by administrators to add it back into the policy guide. That is why we added that section back.
Do we actually have an anger management program? There are anger management programs available in the community that parents can seek, some through their insurance. Livestream does have an anger management program.
But we don't at the
We,
county.
at the
or
district
or
level, no ma'am, we do not have an in-house anger management program. So, again, in summary, the entire purpose of this is to strengthen our policies, our procedures, our process, and our practices. And that is a list of our committee members who have worked really, really hard, and I want to thank them, as well as Elizabeth, who's put up a lot with me and spent a lot of time to help us get our policies aligned, as well as providing recommendations, suggestions, and support. So I appreciate that. And if you have any additional questions, you know where to find me and how to reach me. And this concludes my presentation, and I thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we are at board member comments. Mr. McGuire, I'm coming down to you.
No, certainly.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to first recognize again Alex Patton and Mir Research for providing some factual information and also some encouraging information when it comes to the commitment of our citizens to protect our kids. And I know that collectively the board will come together and our kids will be safer than they were before we had this conversation. I also just want to, as I've listened to the conversation, and particularly when it came to the Spring Creek Charter School, that I genuinely would hope that the board, in consideration of the Guardian program, would think that we're giving one of our schools, because they're a charter school, the ability for their SAC committee and their teachers to make a decision on what's best and how to best protect their kids, that I'm hoping that in our looking at the Guardian program, that we would have the same safeguards for each campus, that they would have the principal buy-in, the SAC committee, and that they would have that same opportunity to make a decision whether it's the best solution for them. That it's no way a mandate, and we're not, and again, from my perspective, that the Guardian program would initially at least be implemented with just our administrators and not teachers. So I just want to clarify those points, and I also just want to share with you that it is so odd to have this conversation that where we are speaking about the idea of finding funding to educate, we're now forced into different situations when it comes to providing safety and security. And that the the state of Florida empirically has not performed when it comes to education. I don't believe they will be with safety and security. So as we put these numbers together, I think it's going to be very important that we use the data that we receive today and understand that our citizens want to invest in our kids, and that we may want to look at very quickly putting something on the November ballot. Just my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dr. Burns?
Well, I would support putting something on the November ballot. I think the safety, I think everybody, and I think our community really supports the safety and security of our children, and that's not cheap. The only other thing I had that I wanted to mention was, and I think you all probably very much enjoyed Friday night's rainstorms. I was soaked for 3 hours until I got home, and was grateful to get out of my wet clothes. But Leesburg High actually got, we won the award for quickest turnaround, and we actually got our graduation off fastest. Within an hour. We had the sound up, and all the kids were in the auditorium, and we walked them in, and it wasn't ideal, and I don't think anyone, hopes for rain in any case, but man, when I was looking at Facebook, people were saying back in 1967, or 67 was a rainstorm, and in 1968 we had it at the Expo Center at the fairgrounds, and I was thinking, well, if this happens every 50 years, our backup plan at Leesburg High was pretty darn good. So I just wanted to thank all the teachers and all the support staff that made that turnaround happen that quickly, and all the parents who handled it with grace and dignity and respect. And it was a really beautiful ceremony. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
This has certainly been a very exciting week and motivating week to be a school board member, with a couple of opportunities to go out and remind us of why we do what we do, to see the end result. I know many of us have the, if not everybody, had the opportunity to enjoy a fantastic STEAM Bowl this week with kids ages, or grades 3 all the way up to 8, and to see their thought processes as they try to engineer solutions and come up with, some element of teamwork to be able to solve some complex math problems. Very well done. Thanks to all the departments that worked collaboratively to put that on together. And then to be able to go out and celebrate some graduations with students was fantastic. I had the privilege of attending both South Lake and East Ridge. One of those was wetter than the other, but nonetheless, while there might have been some grumbles about some rain by parents, I'll tell you that the students were in great spirits, and they did not want to have to come back another day. They didn't mind. They didn't seem to mind. They wanted to enjoy the celebration, and so for that, let them enjoy their day. They'll forever remember it. It was I tell you, there's no greater reward than you see. Here's the culmination of 13 years of investment in these students, for them to walk across the stage with a big smile and be able to trust that we've prepared them to move on to what's next in their lives. So, enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
And I would just like to echo also about the STEAM Bowl competition that I was very impressed with what they were doing. I stopped by there Friday as well. Monday I was there for the first day, and the final task that they had to do was take a cup with 4 peanuts that you would use for shipping, and then create from a cloth that they gave them and some other fishing line and things to create a parachute actions, and the cup had to sit up with no peanuts leaving. They got an extra 10 points for that. If the peanuts left, they got deducted for each peanut, I think it was. But it was fascinating to see what they did and made it happen. And as he said, it was a joint effort, and it was very fascinating to see our young people in our elementary school and middle schools competing this way. Also, I had the opportunity Friday night to be at Mount Dora High School graduation. We were dry. The backup plan was to go to the gymnasium, and what they were able to do was live stream it into the auditorium as well as into the cafeteria for the parents that were not able to get into the gymnasium. And so they made all things possible there to have that. And then Saturday, because Tavares got rained out, I was able to get to both of my schools in my district and be there at that graduation as well. And I had a cousin's granddaughter that was graduating, and I was kind of impelled to be there. So I went and was able to congratulate her at the end as well. But I will say this, principals took a lot of heat this past week because of not planning this, not planning that. But people don't know what all principals did do to plan to try to make other arrangements as well for these programs. Mount Dora High School, she had been trying since Monday to find a different venue to have it, and they were wanting different prices. She tried to get the fairgrounds, and at first it started at $350, and before it was over, it was up to $2,100 just to reserve it. So, and then only have 350 chairs there. They would have to find other chairs. So what I told people that complain to me constantly, you need to find a private investor that would like to go out and build a complex that would seat 5,000 to 7,000 people, and they could use it all during the year for other events, but they have it set up for graduation and make money that way. And that kind of didn't go well either. But
because it would not make
not in Lake County. But the thing is, we don't have the venues for totally being inside in any of our schools in Lake County. And that's because of the way that funding is done. But I applaud our principals for all that they've done to make this happen, and for all the staff that was involved. Come back Saturday at Tavares High School to get the field set up and get everything ready there for them. I applaud them as well. So good job.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gamble. Board, I don't know that we necessarily want to sing, but I'd like to recognize Mr. Gamble, who I believe is turning, is it 60 today? Can I say that about you? Yeah. It's his birthday, so happy birthday, Mr. Gamble. You don't believe that? Okay. I think it's actually 54. I just was trying to make him seem wiser. Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
that was-
yes.
Oh, good. Why, you trying to get your contract renewed?
I also had graduation written down. I know at Umatilla they spoke to the students and they asked the students in the morning of, what do you guys want to do? And they voted they wanted to wait that storm out, but about 9 o'clock, me and Mr. Feltner got lots of time to just, I don't know, to conversate, which we don't get very often. But they decided they were going to push it to the gym, and it was hot and it was packed, but it was really a celebratory environment. Unbelievably, the spirits were so high, the kids were so excited. They did an exceptional job. And yeah, we didn't get too wet because we were waiting the storm out inside, so it was okay. So thank you to everybody that hung in there during the rain. I know we were all receiving updates. Saw a great picture of Superintendent Carnegie in a hat with an umbrella on the top of it. It was just
That was my gift. Yeah. It actually came in handy, yeah.
Yeah, I bet it did. So
I actually understood that she
Yeah.
also helped dry the chairs.
yeah, she did.
I did.
It was a night to remember.
It took all of us. Yeah.
Listen, this class, what we can say is congratulations, and they went out with a bang on
Yeah.
Friday night, or Saturday morning as well. So, right, no.
Thunder and lightning.
Thunder and lightning, that's what I mean. They had all of it together. I know you have this on your notes to add the audit plan to an upcoming workshop for Mr. Mock, so if we can get that added, that would be fantastic. The Value Adjustment Board, we currently have Mr. Ralph Smith is our representative, our citizen representative. Everybody's okay with that. Then Ms. Challenger has agreed to reach out to him and see if he'd still be willing to serve in that capacity. Mr. Dodd, you're our board representative. Is that okay?
That's right.
Okay, just checking. So, Ms. Challenger, there you go on that piece. And I appreciate all of you. I know we've received this week. We spoke, Ms. Carnegie spoke about when we actually make a decision on the Guardian program or how we're going to safely protect our students, that we would let you guys know when there's a vote. I know you guys all received numerous calls this weekend. Vote no on Monday. There is no vote today. We will absolutely make it known when there is a vote. We appreciate all of the input. We've gotten tons of it. I think that this board will come up with the right decision. We saw the data overwhelmingly about having a certified police officer, resource officer on campus. I know when I'm thinking about this, and I just wanted to share this and get the opportunity, it always comes down to, hopefully we're hiring these people to do absolutely nothing, right? Like, hopefully they do absolutely nothing. And in the event that they did something, it's the worst case event we could ever possibly imagine. So I know we've talked about how we've got regionalizing in our place for our county. It's not a one-size-fits-all, hoping that we can look at some options. And I appreciate the board's just continued diligence in receiving information, and appreciate everybody bringing all of those pieces to the table to make that decision. So, Superintendent.
I'll just end with my congratulations to the class of 2018. It was, as I told the group at Eustis, I said it may not have been the graduation ceremony that you dreamed of. However, it will be the most memorable graduation ceremony that probably anyone has experienced. And I was just so impressed with how everyone handled themselves in the midst of, it wasn't fun, but the kids did have smiles on their faces, and they enjoyed themselves nevertheless. And I did appreciate the parents who were supportive and just, they stayed and waited it out, and we didn't begin till 10:30, so we were there till almost midnight. But it was certainly a night to remember, and it was a nice ceremony in the end. So, and if you're like me, you blinked, and Thursday is our last day of school. I just can't believe we're here already, that it's been a year. And so just remember that there is no early release this week either, because we use those days for makeup time from the hurricane. And I just wish everybody a very safe and enjoyable summer.
Mr. Johnson?
Can I send everybody the update on the best and brightest litigation?
I'm seeing some nods. Okay. All right. Well, if no objection to adjourning, we are adjourned.